In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what dwells behind the curtain, the face of evil lurking with the shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make me get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come get it. I say, run, run, come, make me get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make me get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come get it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ike, and today we're going to be talking about the fact that our biology is leading us to genocide. And can we escape that? But first of all, let's go ahead and click that like button. Click that subscribe button if you've not already. Click the share button. Go ahead and share it on YouTube. Share it on all forms of social media. DMs and regular text messages and emails. Okay, you can even jot it down and send you fax it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. Click that like button once again. Share, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and then click that bell button twice. So, our genes have a prerogative, an imperative of their own. Their idea is to propagate their information. Okay, they're a pattern. Okay, they're a particular spelling. Okay, you have an alphabet out there, and then the genes are different particular spellings, right? So you have a particular spelling that represents you and your kind of people. I have spellings that are particular my types of spellings. Your spellings are fighting against my spelling. Okay, it's a spelling bee ladies and gentlemen. It's a spelling bee between me and Kaizoria, insofar as there's a genetic competition going on there. And we're trying to embed our spellings as deep into the future as possible. That's what our goal is. And it is leading us to all kinds of disaster. We feel our genes and our biology as desires, instincts that tend to lead us to self-destruction as a race. Can we transcend this? If we're just tools of the genes, from what place then can we actually see that what the genes are wanting us to do is a bad thing? Okay, and we're going to be reviewing a video today, okay, by my man Brett Weinstein. Okay, and he's interviewing Jonathan Peugeot. Now, Brett Weinstein is coming from the evolutionary biology standpoint. He's an evolutionary biologist, okay? And he's saying we have to transcend the genes. But the question is, from where is he standing to make that judgment? If we are indeed, from an evolutionary standpoint, just tools of the genes, okay, expressions of the genes, then how can we get out of the box, get out of the matrix to question the program? How can we question the program? How can we even recognize? But it is by faith, is it not? Okay, so there is a scientific faith, there's a humanistic faith, and then Jonathan Peugeot talks about just faith in general. The fact that it is always by faith that we can hope, okay, to live towards what we may call love and light, or away from at least genocide. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, as you come in, go ahead and click that like button, as I said already, as we give you time to populate the chat room. Shout out to Dr. Thunder in the building. Shout out to Niger in the building. Shout out to Mike Myers in the building. We got the Cool Gamer in the building. Let us go ahead. Again, what is on the table? Okay, what is on the table is fairly simple, not so difficult to follow. We're talking about the fact that, hey, our biology, our genes, okay, which have an imperative of their own, is leading us to certain disaster. How can we actually get out of the program if we are indeed products of the genes? And let's look from a religious perspective, from a biological perspective, from all possible perspectives to see if it is possible to get out of this one, or is it all deterministic? Is it too late? Is Ukraine and Russia the beginning of it all? But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and start this. Let's make sure our audio settings are correct here, and make sure that we don't have the video muted. Okay, and let's share.
Within Christendom.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. So let's say, because I think that maybe it's just because the way that I view reality very differently, maybe from you. To me, it's like I feel like you always have to hold on to the genes, which is fine. Like I get it, but to me, genes are patterns, self-replicating patterns that exist at a certain level, and that there are self-replicating patterns all through the different levels of being, and that I don't feel like I have to prioritize one rather than the other.
Okay, fair point here. We're just starting into the conversation. We laid down some things about the fact that these genes, right? Okay, these patterns that are trying to embed themselves into the future as much as possible, okay, which is their goal. Let's shoot ourselves as deep into the future as possible. Hence, the individual creatures try to compete and procreate. The genes are thereby meeting their goals. Okay. And now Jonathan Peugeot, who's the person on the left here, is talking about the fact that, yes, these self-replicating patterns express themselves not just on the biological level, okay, but on many other levels, okay. There's a self-replicating pattern, for example, called a city, right? Does that make sense? Can I get a 1 in the chat in this very early on phase of the conversation. Okay, can I get a 1 in the chat in this early on phase of the lecture? If we understand that a city is a pattern that is self-replicating, it's another pattern that is out there, and that there are many other patterns of institutions, human behavior, and whatnot, of which species, and then there's the gene. And they say, well, why should I have to be so specific about why do we give special power to the genes? Okay, why is that so important, right? Well, let us continue and see what Mr. Peugeot continues to say.
Like, I don't understand what makes so when I look, so if when you what you're doing it, you have to run. It seems like you have to run around a lot. But if you let me just finish what I'm saying.
Sure.
If you understand it, for example, you have a pattern, a being, and that being is self-replicating to a certain extent, or creates children in the world, then you can understand the spread, let's say, of Christianity very easily. It just makes sense. You have the reason why missionaries from Greece would go from Constantinople would go to Russia, or the reason why you would have Christians in Ethiopia or in all these different places. You can understand how these patterns will reproduce, and why because for me, what makes it difficult is that how do you account, if you're talking about lineages, then where is housed the commonality between all these different lineages? Like, where is it housed? What is?
Now let me go ahead and put some background here. You see, on the right we have Mr. Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, and he is saying that basically religion is an adaptation, like any other adaptation. And so far, he would not have said anything crazy, being a biologist. A biologist is looking at an organism, and he has these words that he uses, one of which is an adaptation. So these are the features of the organism. And religion is a feature of man, and you call it an adaptation, hence it aids survival, and that it helps the genes to put themselves as far into the future as possible. So far, we follow, right? So the genes have a plan to put myself as far into the future as possible. Religion is an adaptation that helps the genes put its information, okay, as far into the future as possible, right? Because if you behave in these patterns as these religious groups behave, those groups tend to be more successful, okay? Hence, it will be, we get the evolutionary type story, evolutionary type view of things, right? So that's where Mr. Brett Weinstein on the right is coming from, saying, hey, it's going to help your lineage if you actually practice this religion. And Mr. Peugeot on the left is saying, well, but the spread from the Eastern Europe, and we have Ethiopians and all these different types of people practicing the same religion. Well, where is the common lineage here? Is it just about the spreading of the genetics? And that is a side conversation, but in a sense, yes, Brett is still correct in the sense that you are still making it better when you spread your religion. You're still making it better for yourself, right? But anyways, let's continue.
Is it?
Well, okay.
Like, where are those patterns? Like, they're obviously not in the genes anymore. Now they're
right. They're
housed at a higher level. Like, these patterns at higher levels, they exist. They're not just let's say, I don't know how else to say it.
Well, let me the simple answer to your question is they're definitely not housed in the genes. There may be a predisposition towards a religious viewpoint in the genes, but what is housed in the genes is extremely limited. What you are talking about is housed in culture. And here's the thing that people miss. Culture is special. It evolves rapidly because it can move horizontally. Most culture moves vertically, right? The more durable a piece of culture is, the more likely you are to have inherited it vertically.
Okay, so what is horizontal versus vertical in here? Basically, he's saying culture can move horizontally. That also makes it fast. Basically, horizontal means in the same generation, okay? So in the same generation, you can have culture that spreads. In the same generation, you can have, Dr. Thunder out there, spreading his his gospel, and it spreads in the same generation. It doesn't have to wait for generation to generation to generation. Now, things that spread vertically go from generation to generation to generation. Now, culture that lasts actually does get spread vertically. In other words, it comes from generations past. So just to clarify some terms being used here, that's what it means by culture being fast, because it spreads horizontally.
Because it can move horizontally. Most culture moves vertically, right? The more durable a piece of culture is, the more likely you are to have inherited it vertically. And so, yes, you do have this very interesting pattern of people, spreading the good word, right, to people who aren't related to them. And then the point is it will move vertically down, right, to descendants, wherever it takes hold. And so that does create lots of seeds of the cultural belief that are not fundamentally connected lineage-wise. But then the question is why? Why does a lineage engage in a expensive behavior of sending missionaries out into the world to spread the word? And the answer is,
yeah, why does it benefit you to spread your religion if religion is an adaptation that helps you to keep your genes pushed into the future?
I believe, because it creates a hospitable world for the home lineage, right? That actually there's...
Okay, good particular hypothesis there. That, hey, that was the first one that comes to mind. That's the trivial answer. There are probably other answers, or maybe other complex views by which, the evolutionary story still holds, where, hey, you're going out there to spread this religion, this way of being out there to those that actually don't share your genes, okay? Then how's that helping your genes, right? But saying, hey, it's making the world more hospitable for my mode of being, if you will.
Missionaries out into the world to spread the word. And the answer is, I believe, because it creates a hospitable world for the home lineage, right? That actually there's an advantage to it. But let me answer your basic question, right? I think I know that you're hearing my obsession with the genes, right, as like a defect of perspective. I don't think it is. I think the point is we are unavoidably haunted by the genes. And so I am vigilant about keeping track of what role they are playing, because to lose track of that puts us in danger. And I would just say, by analogy, if we look at Twitter, right, and we say, well, Twitter is a place where people exchange, perspectives in small snippets, and they develop an emergent understanding of the world, right? I have forgotten that Twitter is also a business that programs opaque algorithms that decide who sees what. And so it's not a place in which people develop an emergent perspective. It is a place where people exchange concepts, but the way they exchange them is regulated by an unseen force. And any moment...
Yes. So basically he's saying Twitter, using the Twitter example to kind of highlight the importance of genes, okay? Basically saying that the genes are like the Twitter program. They are the filter through which things happen, that you can't just say things are happening freely, and progress is directional and in the direction of the good and the just, or whatever, or that we are free, but that the genes have to be respected, their ends need to be respected, and they will blow in our faces, ladies and gentlemen. Again, our biology is leading us to genocide, it would seem. Can we transcend it? Do we need to transcend it? What does it mean to transcend it? What are these categories we're talking about? Ladies and gentlemen, click that like button as you come in. Click the subscribe button if you have not. Click the bell button twice. Let's continue.
At which you forget, and you think you're just around people you chose, right? Expressing ideas as you see fit and them responding as they see fit. Any point you lose track of the role the algorithm is playing in what you see, you've made an error and you're not going to understand where you are. Yeah. So my point is, that's the genes. I'm not in love with the genes. I'm afraid of what they'll do. And I'm trying to keep track of their role in all of our interactions because I know what they're up to and it's not good.
All right. Okay. So let me try.
He knows what the genes are up to and it is not good. Now, what do you think about that, Kaizoria? What do you think about that, Dr. Thunder, Chaos Rain? How can you, a product of the genes, look at what the genes is doing and say, it is not good? Okay, or you can say whatever you want to say, right? These are just a jumble of words. It doesn't even matter anyways. But theoretically, from where would you stand to be able to judge what the genes are doing? You are just saying what the genes want you to say. Maybe the genes are just, at what point do you get out of the matrix?
All of our interactions, because I know what they're up to and it's not good.
All right. Okay. So let me try to do something which might surprise you a little bit. Or so what I try to posit is that we live in these bodies, like we have these experiences, and so we have an experience of desire. We have all these experiences. We have this sense of the world. We have this embodied reality in which we live. Okay, and so my interpretation always starts from there, because you don't experience your genes, right?
Right.
You experience them as desires. You experience them as drives. You experience them as judgments on others, or as a critical eye on certain things, or whatever. And so for me, the best way to represent what you're saying would actually look more like a Christian, like, ontology, which is that we have certain, like, Christian would say something like, you have desires, you have passions, and those passions are dangerous. And if you give in to those passions, then you will die, right? Let's say spiritually, our society will die. All of these things will happen at higher levels. And if you attach yourself, if you attend to higher things like love, if you attend to virtues, then you will live and your society will live. So to me, that.
All right. Remember, the question on the table is not Jonathan, but Mr. Brett Weinstein says that he knows what the genes are up to and that the genes are bad. I earlier on started this whole thing by saying, look, our biology, our genes, right, are leading us to disaster. Human nature evidently is genocidal. And it's not far-fetched to think that we'll wipe ourselves out in the next 200 years or something like that, right? Not far-fetched, okay? So the question is, well, how can you know? Well, how can you judge that the genes are good or bad? Okay, what they're trying to do. And Mr. Peugeot has said, look, okay, well, you can look at this particular Christian ontology that says, look, you have the desires and the instincts, okay, which we've already talked about as being the ways in which the genes present themselves to you, right? These desires and instincts are bad. And if you focus on the highest good, so these judgments that Mr. Peugeot is making, he's making them comfortably from a place of faith, from a place of a higher layer, okay, which can be seen as what faith is. Faith is, you take a leap and then you make a judgment from a higher level because the level that you're making, the level upon which the judgment is being made has insufficient information, if you will, okay? But that is the question on the table.
Then you will live and your society will live. So to me, that way of describing comes first, and then like all the interpretation of genes will come after, because we don't this is the if you talk to people about genes, you're not going to make them change the way they live.
Oh, right.
If you tell them don't rape, then that does something.
Oh, like we are not
don't rape because you should love your neighbor. And why do you love your neighbor? Because if you love your neighbor, then we exist in harmony and peace, in the image of the highest good, which is a God of love, let's say. So that will do something. But I don't know, like talking.
Peugeot also added the pragmatic aspect too. Okay, now, obviously, I believe Brett will also defend himself here too. Brett is not saying that he's going to teach people about genes and in order to augment their behavior. No. But he's talking about, let's talk about the genes, because they are that elephant in the room that if attention isn't paid to, they are the program after all, insofar as we understand. And Dr. Thunder is giving his 2 cents here, saying that there's a false dichotomy here between saying, or that, if I understand what you're addressing here, since we don't know what the genes are capable of, well, you don't even necessarily know if the genes are capable of, shall we say, questioning themselves. Now, here's what I mean by that. Consciousness is a tool, right? Consciousness is another tool, right? Consciousness may be a tool by which the genes, okay, in other words, by which your biology, by which the automated side of you looks to review things and, maybe rewrite some new code, refresh and update some things. In our daily experience, this is how we experience consciousness, right? We experience consciousness in the things that are new, okay? So when we already are masters of driving the car and we know very well the route to work, we're not necessarily conscious of that route or the driving. But when it's the first time driving a car on the freeway, we're very conscious. So consciousness writ large, generally speaking, can be said to be that thing, okay, which comes to kind of add new information, maybe question where the genes are going, okay, and say, hey, maybe we need to rewrite certain things. But we haven't gotten that far in the conversation yet, have we? No, we have not. But we're saying, hey, the genes are leading us to disaster. How can we get off this disaster ship? From whence can we stand and pronounce judgment upon the direction of the genes, okay? And we have religious frameworks that already do that from a position of faith. And you can come from an evolutionary standpoint and still stand from a position of faith and say that, look, I am going to jump up one layer above to pronounce judgments on the genes, even though I'm an expression of the genes. Perhaps I'll make my excuse by saying, I'm using my consciousness, even though it's a tool of the genes, but it is a tool that can question things, okay? And know that it is blind. But anyways, now I'm in a blind alley.
Talking to people about genes, like if your purpose is to let's say create the change that you want to create, I don't know.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think that, look, I want people to understand genes and biology because I think it's fascinating. I think it makes for a richer life to understand what the layers below your experience are made of and how it accounts for your existence. But I am not imagining that anybody is going to be sold on a new way of viewing themselves or the world on the basis of the genes. I do want people to have a proper fear about the genes. And the basic point would be, look, everything that is amazing about us was built by that genetic layer. The things that we love most about ourselves, our ability to be enlightened, our ability to be decent, our moral capacity, all of these things are evolved, right? The genes, at the very least, set that in motion. Many of them.
You say that we have to topple them.
No, it's not like that.
Right.
Okay. All of the best things about us evolved. All of the worst things about us evolved too. And
shout out to the 100 Kenya shillings. I believe that's $1. Okay. The color gave you away. But thank you very much. Okay. For the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Yes. And Mr. Brett Weinstein is continuing saying, look, everything good about us evolved. Everything bad about us evolved. Okay. So now we have this menu of good and bad things. And if we leave it up to the genes going forward, or let's not even put it that way, we cannot afford to leave it up to the genes going forward. That's what we're saying. So we got this menu of all these good things and all these bad things. Now we got some nuclear weapons sitting over there, okay, in some silo somewhere. We know where this is going. Is there a way to kind of transcend this? Okay. Now, there are many people who have thought about this, including the eugenicists and the transhumanists, I believe, also have their thing or two to say about these kinds of things. But here we're talking about even the possibility of questioning the genes and the modes of which, you know, what are the possible new paths? What are the possible degrees of freedom? And shout out to Tunija, apparently having his first stream. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that true? Maybe we'll bring him up on the panel later to explain himself. But anyways, let's continue.
And we have to choose. That's the point, right? I want us to look at the whole spectrum of what we can be, right? From extremely enlightened and decent to manning gas chambers. And I want us to say, you know what? There's a bunch of this I'm just not on board with, no matter what it does for my genes. And there's a bunch of this other stuff that I'd like to see augmented and spread as wide as possible. And so what that means is that the genes can't be in charge anymore because they will choose both, right? If we want the good stuff, then what we have to do is actually say, look, you have given us the tools to see that the way I have sometimes described it is that the cosmos is a gigantic spelling bee that ends in genocide, right? That's not where we want to be, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. But in order not to be that way, we have to look at that potential and we have to say, no matter what, that's off the table. We effectively have to go Geneva Convention on the whole puzzle without violating the math of the situation, right?
But that capacity, what you're saying, I mean, this is my understanding, doesn't seem to be housed in the genes. It seems to be housed in consciousness.
Right, exactly. consciousness, the tool. The genes gave us consciousness. Why? To get our genes into the future. And the point is, we have to now say, thank you very much. We appreciate consciousness. Now we're going to use it for something that's actually worthwhile.
Right. Now, we have come to the point, right? We forecast this point, okay, which is the point of saying that consciousness is that tool by which we can review the genes and examine the goals of the genes and perhaps, question it. Now, whether or not we can do anything about it is a different question, okay? And also, this idea of saying that consciousness is a tool of the genes, that particular construct, that particular way of understanding this seems it's perhaps unnecessary. I recognize in there a typical pattern, but I will not quibble about that. But we are at this point in the conversation where the question is being asked, and we continue.
Right.
But that worthwhile doesn't come from the genes.
Right.
It comes from
genes to go screw themselves.
Right. It comes from a higher good, let's say.
You can say it comes from a higher good. I can say the genes screwed up and they awarded us a tool that allows us.
So Jonathan Peugeot is saying, hey, where does this, okay, so we have this consciousness thing that we're using to review. Okay, where do we get this review power from? Where we get this advise and consent power from? This judicial review. We have this Supreme Court called the consciousness that we're presumably using. Where do we get it from, right? And Mr. Weinstein is saying, look, I'm just willing to call it a cheat code in the game, or like, hey, maybe the genes screwed up and gave us something that we can now use to turn against it, or something that he's fine with that pattern and keep on playing the dance, okay? And he's not so interested in the philosophical foundings of or the philosophical implications of what he's saying, per se. You say, oh yeah, sure, it's a cheat code.
Higher good, let's say.
You can say it comes from a higher good. I can say the genes screwed up and they awarded us a tool that allows us to understand what they're up to so we can reject it. Right.
But we need a place to stand from which to reject it. Like we need a
right. But we're standing there, you and me, right now, right? You've got one perspective, which is that there's some higher force that has allowed.
Now, I like that move that Brett used, where he says, "Hey, okay, when you ask me, oh, we need a place to stand from," it's like, hey, you and I are standing there right now. Okay, what is all this question about? From whence do you make the judgment? I'm making the judgment right now from right here. You and I are talking about it. You and I are able to see and discuss the ends that the genes are putting us up to, okay? And we're able to make these judgments. So we're standing there, aren't we?
Allowed us to opt towards the good.
So the higher force thing is going to be a problem. Like maybe because I feel like this conversation would have to keep going for another 10 hours for us to really get to the thing. It's patterns.
Yes.
So they're higher patterns. One of the reasons why I emphasize the fact that patterns scale up is that these patterns, they really do scale up, and as they scale up, they manifest the good of that which they're patterning. Okay, that's what a pattern is, and that's what's maybe a hard thing for a lot of people to understand is that patterns. We need consciousness to recognize patterns, right? Consciousness is what recognizes pattern, but recognizing patterns is judging pattern. It is always an act of seeing if something is good.
Okay, so when he says good, let me go ahead and do a little bit of translation here. So far, let's not forget where we are. We are at that place where we are saying we are going to question the worthwhileness of what the genes are pushing us to do. That what the genes are pushing us to do is going to lead us to kill ourselves with the nuclear weapons. We're not gonna make it if we stay on this biological imperative that we experience via desires and instincts and whatnot. Okay. And we are going to pause now at this pattern conversation that was raised. Okay. So Mr. Peugeot is saying, hey, patterns. Okay. That patterns are very important, and patterns are something that are important to consciousness, because consciousness are indeed the housing of patterns. Okay. Consciousness is indeed the pattern recognition, the identity giving power, if you will. Okay. and to say that, look, pattern is judgment and judgment is pattern. Now, I may be jumbling a whole bunch of words here together, but I am taking snapshots from many different angles here to talk about the importance of pattern and how it's tied to consciousness. Basically, seeing patterns and then saying that seeing the good in something is seeing the pattern in something is something that I wanted to kind of hopefully try to translate. He said pattern, consciousness, and then he said good. Okay, what does the good have to do with a pattern? Okay, so basically, the good in this sense means the being of something. Okay, that's what he's using, being as good. Okay, being and just the logic of something as good, as the good of it. So basically, the good of this pad that I'm holding up is a set of patterns that I recognize. I recognize color, I recognize shape, I recognize hardness, and my consciousness is giving, and your consciousness, to the degree to which you're maybe looking at this pad or imagining this pad, right, with me, okay? We recognize a pattern, a set of patterns. You don't get to feel the coldness of it or the hardness of it, right? But you see shape and you see color. I have more pattern information here that gives us the realness, the identity, the beingness, and the goodness of this thing, and all that kind of stuff, which is related to judgment, which is related to consciousness. That whole crazy circle, which I just went through there, was an attempt to be able to elucidate what he was saying there. He being Jonathan Peugeot. But thank you, Dr. Thunder. Okay. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, sharing the wealth, $5. Again, so we got into this consciousness, which is the tool by which you're judging the goals of the genes and the tool by which you could possibly transcend the genes. And then we get into pattern, and I just demonstrated how pattern and consciousness kind of are very, very intertwined and interrelated. And let us continue, ladies and gentlemen.
Depending on the pattern which it is informing. Okay, so like when I'm looking at a glass, I'm always consciously or unconsciously, I'm judging whether it's a good glass. Can it hold water? Can I drink from it? And if it doesn't, then it's not fully in line with its good, which is what I.
And just to bring in another aspect of consciousness and utility, in other words, that pattern is also utility. That form is function in a certain sense, in the sense that we don't see objects, we see tools, is another way to see it, right? We see tools and obstacles. We see barriers and obstacles, depending on what the frame is. Okay, if the frame is to go get food, then we just see ways that help us to get food, tools that could possibly help us get food, things that we can grasp or hold on to, and things that are not tool-like, we don't even necessarily perceive, it could be said, right? That we're always grasping things, and we use these words such as grasp to describe the mental patterning of things, the mental conceptualization of things, okay, is a kind of reaching out for a tool, reaching out to grab something, reaching out to do something. So there's always this is now extending pattern into the utilitarian end, in the saying that looking, perception is utilitarian, consciousness is utilitarian. It's looking to find the utility, the use, judging things for their suchness, their goodness, their being, and whatnot. Click the like button as you come in.
I see it as doing, okay, from the point of view of consciousness. And so that is what scales up towards really the good. That is the ultimate good. And as we bind together in families, we can perceive through consciousness. We can perceive, if we're attentive, the good of our family. But that good isn't enough, like you said, because that good can be now put in competition with the goods of others, like a soccer team or baseball team or whatever, where you can see the good of your team, but you're in competition with others. So that continues to scale. Like this is a Thomistic argument, right? This is like a medieval scholastic argument about the manner in which things exist, which is that these goods scale up into the infinite good. So it's not a higher force in the sense of some kind of weird physical thing that exists outside the universe. It's a pattern. Patterns are not the physical stuff. They are that invisible aspect of things which drives them towards together, which binds them.
So going from consciousness to pattern, what we recognize as things are patterns, right? All the way through to saying like this good that we see, and this harmony that we can imagine, whereby there's a harmony between the family structure and the community structure, and then the kingdom, and everyone is doing their thing individually and also serving a higher purpose. In other words, this good whereby there is a higher good that everyone is aiming towards, call it God, call it the good as such, that is a pattern question, okay? And that it is a pattern that gives rise to the good, that the pattern is the good. Now, pattern is good, pattern gives rise to good. So we're not so far out. Now, obviously, these are propositions, propositions on the edge of metaphysics, which could always be investigated further.
Them together, you could say, the invisible patterning, which makes you see that they exist. And that's what scales up into ultimately a perception of something like the infinite love that is behind all things.
Okay. Let me try it from a different direction.
All right, let's see.
Okay. I believe I can derive from what you've said that you and I will agree that consciousness.
Uh-oh. Hold on a second. We shall be back.
And that more love.
So here he is saying that consciousness is good. That's what they're going to agree on. They're going to, let me take a few steps back here.
It is behind all things.
Okay. Let me try it from a different direction.
All right, let's see.
Okay. I believe I can derive from what you've said that you and I will agree that consciousness is good because it allows us to understand where we are and to act in our own interests, and that our own
it's the prerequisite for good.
Own interests involve something that you and I would agree is, that love is good, and that more love tends to improve a system, and that we therefore ought to bias things in the direction of its propagation. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Have I said anything that violates your
No,
understanding?
for now you're good.
Good. All right. So, and let us further agree that we don't really need to defend those things. Even if I can't ultimately defend the idea that consciousness is good, I'm just going to say, hey, I think it's awesome, and I want to use it. Okay.
But it's the mechanism by which we even know something's good. So to say that it's not good it's just, you're just going to be running around in circles at some point,
Yep. I know.
Without it, you would not see the good without consciousness.
Right. So I'm willing to call it good because for there to be a good, you need the consciousness to even recognize that there is such a thing. So let's just let's cheat and just say it's good.
Cheat.
Let's hard code it as good. Okay. Now here's the point. My consciousness is stuck in space and time. Okay. It exists now and it can only see so far. Right. And it's extended. I have history books. I can look backwards in time farther than I could otherwise without them. I can project into the future by virtue of pooling my understanding with other people who have thought about where we're headed and what will happen. But I'm still stuck in space and time. When I say I am talking about that consciousness stuck in time, but I don't have to be. When I say we, right, I could be talking about you and me, or I could be talking about our lineage, right? We began farming 10,000 years ago, right? And the argument I want to make is, morally speaking, I believe if consciousness and love are good, then in some sense, I am obligated to do that which grants consciousness and love to the maximum number of individuals who can experience it. Okay. So now I'm trying to step out of my stuckness in space and time.
And would you go as far as to say something like love your enemy? Like, would you go as far as that? Let's say.
Well, I don't love your enemy naively, right? But yes, work to a place where you and your enemy realize that you're not really enemies because you both would like to grant consciousness and love to as many future people as you can. Mm-hmm. And that in order to do that, we have to stop fighting in the way we've been fighting, right? And so my point would be, my conscious.
Something about the minority rule came to mind here, in the sense that it is obvious that not everybody shares what was just said. Not everybody shares that they would like to grant consciousness and love to as much people as possible. Okay, not everybody shares that, and I would like to know what the numbers are. Okay, some people actually think that most morality is a minority rule, and by morality I mean norms. More in the realm of societal norms, okay? Okay, that it's a minority rule, meaning only a minority of people actually would rather have it the way it is. But anyways, let's continue.
Consciousness is stuck in space and time because of the genes. Genes granted us consciousness as a tool. And the point is, my ability to affect events 10,000 years in the future is zero, or presumably very close to it, right?
I mean, it depends. 10,000 is long, but at least some consciousness have affected a few thousand years for sure.
Sure. And look, I aspire to it. I would love for this conversation to have an effect on people's viewpoint. That
10,000 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, not as a matter of ego, but I just think it would be cool if we woke people up enough that actually the conversation had some resonance. But do I really expect this conversation or anything I ever do to have resonance 10,000 years down the line? Probably not.
Probably does not.
Yeah, but the point is, because consciousness is a tool of the genes, it is scaled to think at the level that would have been useful to the ancestors in which consciousness emerged. In other words, it makes sense to think a couple generations down the line, but it doesn't make sense to think 100 generations down the line, not because that isn't important, but because you have no ability to impact it, right? A hunter-gatherer who tried to think about how they could alter their behavior to benefit their descendants 100 generations later would have had no ability to make any useful change. So it makes sense to be focused on things that are local to you in space and time until you reach modernity. You and I are in a very different situation, right? Our insane battling over modern stuff actually has strong implications for whether or not there are human beings here 10,000 years from now, right? In fact, it's more likely than not that there won't be. In order for there to be human beings here 10,000 years from now, we are going to have to behave very carefully, and we're going to have to figure out how to preserve the precious opportunity that we have, wherever it came from. So my point is that consciousness of mine is artificially stuck, artificially locally, right? If selection had been built in creatures that had impacts 10,000 years in the future, our consciousness would be scaled to be able to see 10,000 years in the future and care about it. But we're not good at it because our ancestors were limited. The power of their tools was small.
Yeah, and so I think that there are some consciousnesses, human consciousness, that are able to see not 10,000 years in the future in the granular sense, but 10,000 years in the future in the pattern sense. They're able to perceive higher patterns.
Great.
And are able to talk about cycles, great cycles of being and great cycles of civilization.
Which, by the way, they're having right now. They are human beings having this conversation right now. That is a trivial point to point out. And interesting points are being made here in the chat as well, and things are being noticed about what is being said. But Brett's point is, look, our consciousness is like it's not you know, you're like trying to use the spoon, you know, to bail out the ocean or something. Okay, it's not gonna think too far ahead. Hence, we are doomed to destroy ourselves. The more I think of these kinds of arguments, and that's why I brought up the eugenicists earlier, it seems to lead politically in one direction, in my opinion. It seems to lead in direction of, hey, I am an elite. I have an understanding of where we're going. I have an understanding of where we shouldn't go. And I think that perhaps me and those who agree with me and understand me are best suited to survive, and we will survive, and we're off to Mars or something like that. But those are the political implications that my limited mind can come up with.
Like I don't think that this is something which has not been available to people. And the same thing with consciousness. I think that all religious practices believe that consciousness can increase, and that you can increase, the capacity of consciousness to perceive patterns and to engage in patterns and to transform patterns, right? Which is why we name things after people, right? Which is why we have patrons of things. Like consciousness can become, let's say, the guarantors of aspects of reality, you could say. So I think that.
Yeah, so we can enact other patterns. We talked about a pattern, which is a city, for example. Or we can, discover things and then have certain other patterns that are out there in terms of law, behavior, tradition, rituals, and so on and so forth. Let's go.
The way that religion talks about consciousness seems to understand that consciousness is the point of where all of this comes together, and that it's working on consciousness, which is more important than the technical stuff. Like a good example is something, like there's a saying which is in Judaism and in Christianity too, right? The just holds the world together. The just is the foundation of the world, and that the idea that becoming a better person is the best thing you can do for that to happen. Like one of the reasons why we're in the mess we're in is because we started to perceive the world only materially, and that the idea of gaining material power and gaining power on the world was the highest purpose that we could imagine. So we created these massive technological systems which are driving us into madness, which are making us crazy. We've actually moved away from the ideals which held religion together. Even if religions did bring about wars, brought about some horrible stuff, religious thinking has never brought humanity to the precipice of destruction, like the very existence of the world being held in the balance. Whereas as we move away from that and we started to think technically, scientifically only, then we come to this point where we unleash these golems on the world that we don't even understand we can't see the scope of what they're doing. We don't see, I'm even willing to give Twitter, for example, the benefit of the doubt that they didn't understand the monster they were unleashing on the world when they did. And now we see the golem turning against its master, like in all the ancient traditions of mechanical beings that don't follow the will of their master, let's say. Anyways, so I'm not sure, maybe continue on with what you think the solution is, but I don't know.
First, let me say, I don't disagree with what you said. Yeah. I'm sure religions have sometimes brought their own lineage to an end. Bad decision-making will have been
Don't forget to get those likes up, share the stream, click the subscribe button if you have not, click the bell button twice. Fair use.
Case, but they will not have brought humanity there. You're right. And the abandonment of religion and the embrace of full materialism, I agree, has clearly brought us there. I will also say we are stuck in space and time. Our consciousness is, which doesn't, you and I are having a conversation about what will be 10,000 years from now, right? That is us trying to bring 10,000 years from now into our consciousness. But we are in some sense we are using a tool that is not appropriately scaled, right? So if you think about how Mount Rushmore was carved, right? Mount Rushmore is a sculpture, right? A sculptor uses chisels. And I'm sure there were chisels used in the making of Mount Rushmore, but there was also like dynamite, right? And my point is that a chisel isn't sufficient to make Mount Rushmore. And our consciousness is going to need some upgrading if we're going to pull off the trick of figuring out where our interests actually are with respect.
Okay. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the question is a broad and simple one. Our genes are leading us to disaster. Our biology is leading us to disaster. How can we get out of this programming? How can we get out of this disaster train? Oh, we have consciousness. We use consciousness to examine and to judge. Okay. Now, our consciousness doesn't seem to be good enough of a tool. Okay. It's, we need dynamite. Okay. As opposed to chisel. Or as I said earlier, we need something much bigger than a spoon. Now, this is where the transhumanists will come in and say, hey, look, right? I can give you some consciousness augmenting products, software, glass you can wear. I even had some ideas when we did our transhumanism conversation a few weeks ago, right? About perhaps having implants that will give people these meters and think, for example, insulin levels or other important levels medically, levels of particular vital fluids in the body that people need to know, right? What if you just had like a dashboard that you could just, click your finger and it just comes up and you have the hydration meter and you have your blood pressure or everything just right in front of you. Okay. But again, quick story. Consciousness is what we're going to use to judge, but seems that consciousness is not up to the task. So what are we going to do?
To the future 10,000 years from now, right? And so we're basically stuck with chisels and we need to upgrade to dynamite in order to get there. But the long and short of it is we do not think in terms of providing a world to our descendants 10,000 years from now because our ancestors didn't have an opportunity at that scale, whereas we clearly do. or more likely we have the opportunity to rob our descendants of that future if we are not careful. And so what I'm really arguing is, if it is our obligation to provide the opportunity for consciousness and love to as many descendants as we can, that means an indefinite future for humanity. That means we have to put aside the lineage against lineage battling that has shaped humanity. It has brought us this far, but we have to get past it. And so I don't want to see a synonymizing of the people of the world. I don't want to see us all be the same, but we do have to reach an agreement in which the things that cause us to jeopardize the future are shelved permanently in favor of a world.
In a certain sense, one level of meta conversation about this conversation is I'm not quite sure exactly what Brett thinks he is after. Okay. This thing that is going to help us figure it out. Again, the first step that I took politically, as a way of kind of enacting such a society, right? Whatever, because you have to go into the political realm and kind of think like, what kind of a society would this be where we know not everybody's going to know these things that Brett is talking about. So it's going to be him and a few other eggheads in the chat, right? A few eggheads in the chat whom are, intellectual elitists, and they're the ones that are going to know these things. So, and then what? Okay. Are these people now going to decide for all of humanity where we're going to go? Is that going to save us? How does this actually come into be? Now, that's a meta conversation, or shall we say side conversation, tangential or adjacent conversation to this one.
That does foster consciousness, love, insight, beauty, all of the things that we would agree are inherently or close to inherently good, right? And that we're not going to get there by accident, and we're not going to get there. This is the place where you and I may differ. We are not going to get there by embracing the traditions that have arrived in the present but are not built for it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's where I disagree, because I don't see what I see in for example, I see wokeism as a desire to create these types of, a desire to create a kind of structure which will supposedly bind us together, right? I see a lot of the COVID measures as a desire to do that as well. I see things of people trying to do that, but because they are not grounded in the ancient stories, they don't understand, they don't have a kind of mythical underpinning that has been developed for millennia, then they're creating monsters. They're Frankenstein creations.
We are in total agreement about that, by the way.
But what I believe is that I believe that, let's say being the best Christian I can be and living with my family and my neighbors and the people around me in the best way, that's the first best thing I can do, right? That's really the first best thing I can do. And then obviously taking seriously the teachings of Christ, which is, to love your neighbor, to love your enemy, to not do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. That's also important. But the way it happens is fractally. It's not, I don't think it's in creating a kind of Tower of Babel. I think it happens, let's say in a certain manner, it happens kind of bottom up, where as these communities come together and in truth and in love and in beauty, then that creates new patterns that other people can replicate. And then those patterns get replicated. It seems that that's how it happened in the first place. Let's say if you think of even the way that Christianity spread, well, that's how it happened. You had people who exemplified patterned living, and that at first people hated them for it, were angry with them, but then that ended up acting like seeds, which replicated itself in other communities because they could see the good that it was bringing. But it happened that way, rather than like saying we're all going to get together and we're going to agree, right? We're going to consciously agree on a way forward towards the future. That to me sounds like what people are trying to do now. And what I see coming from it, like the Great Reset and all that kind of stuff, is frightening as hell.
Oh, it's a disaster. It's a terrible disaster. And you're not wrong about it. And you're not wrong that what I'm arguing loosely fits in that same category, right? But here's the problem. I now think I can see, I don't know if I can convey it, but I think I can see what the important thing we have to get to is. And it's going to come in two forms. The first thing I have to say is we are absolutely damned if we do and damned if we don't. Okay. That is the fundamental nature of the predicament that I'm trying to describe. And I don't like it, but that's where we are as far as I can tell. And the other thing is the mechanism you just described for how we got here cannot be the mechanism that we use to get out of here. As much as that may sound like a paradox, it got us this far.
No, it's still remains on Brett to show us why religion, which Mr. Peugeot is saying gives the basic guidelines. Religion gives you the basic things to watch out for, okay? And it gives you the basic orientation. It says orient yourself towards the highest good, and you will be able to make judgments and make corrections, and you will also satisfy the genetic imperative. Now, Brett, coming purely from the generic imperative side, says, hey, genes want to propagate themselves into the future, right? They want to propagate themselves into the future as deeply as possible. Religions are an adaptation, a tool by which genes propagate themselves into the future, but these ancient religions are now inadequate. They don't have the right code. Mr. Peugeot is saying they're adequate enough. They have enough of the backbone, okay? And Brett now has to demonstrate to us, well, why or what a new code would have to include. Would it include how you avoid such demons as Mark Zuckerberg, for example?
If we continue to use it, it'll be our undoing. So I take the mechanism that got us here as the evolution of these religious traditions. And my point is the evolution of those religious traditions will cross through extinction. That mechanism, if we continue to allow it to drive, will drive us extinct. The alternative is terrible, which is what you're saying, right? I don't disagree with you about this, but I think we have to confront it. And the point is, religions, every adaptation, right? Forget whether it's religion or an eye or a wing or a leaf. Every adaptation is useful relative to the environment in which it evolved, right? A fish may be beautifully evolved to swim on a reef. It is terribly evolved in the bottom of the boat, right? In the bottom of the boat, it's a catastrophe of inappropriate tools, right? So my point would be the religions that brought us here are adaptive, or they were adaptive in the world in which they came about. Our world is now changing so rapidly and is composed of so many things that those religions did not foresee in any specific sense that we are.
I think they did, though.
Well,
I really do think they did. I really do think they did foresee what's going on.
Well,
right
they
now.
foresee certain things. And, you point out, like, Twitter is the golem that we unleash on the world, and they didn't know what they were doing. And I agree at that level. Yes, they foresaw something, but they didn't foresee the splitting of the atom. They didn't foresee the evolution of algorithms, right? Not specifically enough to be instructive. And so
if survival is your basic focus, and if danger therefore becomes something you're watching out for, then Brett's point of view is a little clearer in the sense of everything that he wants religion to foresee and guard against has to do with dangers, right? The dangers of the algorithm and the dangers of the splitting of the atom, and the dangers of the chemical and biological weapons, the dangers of technology combined with human folly, if you will. And he's not crazy for focusing there. And religions have also contributed their main force, right, around the area of what we should do and how we should live so that we stay out of danger and trouble. Okay? So let us continue, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for those participating in the chat, for those who have super chatted. Okay? Shout out to Kaizoria again and Dr. Thunder. For those of you listening quietly, thank you. For those of you coming in, click those like buttons on those individual phones of yours.
Here's the problem. We are stuck with an infinite regress of Chesterton's fence, right? We know, if I'm right about what religions are, that they are adaptive compendiums of...
Chesterton's fence basically is you are in the middle of the land somewhere and then you see a fence. Basically, you don't want to kick down the fence until you know what the fence is for, okay? And we inherit a lot of traditions, okay? Think of it as that fence. We inherit certain things, and the conservative attitude is to say, hey, look, don't kick it down, okay? Again, Chesterton's fence. Don't kick it down till you know what it's for. So there's this kind of, he's saying, hey, look, you're having this infinite regression of Chesterton's fence where you're like, okay, I can't kick down the fence because it goes down thousands and thousands of years and on and on. but it's not adequate. It's not adequate. It's not adequate, he's saying. Why isn't it adequate?
Wisdom. We are stuck with the fact that there is no, when you program a computer, you put comments next to the lines. You say, this function is supposed to accomplish this thing. That's why I put it here, right? Here are the arguments you submit to this function. You say that in English so that somebody else can come into your program and say, that's the job this is doing. Religion doesn't come with that, right? You get the program in the Bibles, but you don't get the explanation of how, I think I can explain why a belief in heaven is adaptive, but it's not explained anywhere.
There's an entire tradition of theology and church fathers that do exactly that.
Well, they may be trying to reverse engineer it. And there was certainly a tradition that attempted to reconcile, modern scientific thought with religious thought. I take no position on that. But my point is, if we are handed ancient compendiums of wisdom in a modern world in which some of the things in those compendiums are as relevant as ever, some of the things in those compendiums are now irrelevant, and some of the things in those compendiums are the opposite of you.
The thing about the fence, by the way, is people don't just put fences down for no reason. It's an expensive thing. It takes time and planning. So point is, whenever there's something that's expensive, such as religion, right? There's usually an adaptive reason why it's there. Even if you don't know why this fence is in the middle of the street, right? Or in the middle of this particular land, before you just kick it down, you got to investigate. Somebody actually decided to put this fence here. It was an expensive thing to do. Anyways, let's continue.
Useful, right? They have gone from useful to dangerous because of the change in the world we live in. Then we could try to figure out which pieces are in what category, which is liable to be an error-prone exercise, dangerous in its own right and very slow. We could try to substitute something new, which will not have the benefit of having passed the test of time, and therefore we will end up with the problems of wokeism or, a COVID health policy, right? We will make error after error. And so my point is that neither of those is a survivable program. So we have to do some third thing, right? Where a friend of mine coined the term that what we have to provide something that fits a religion-shaped hole, that there's a hole in our being that needs something of this form, that the ancient religions put us in danger because they're not up to speed on modern problems. And novel religions are effectively cults until they pass the test of time, and we don't have the luxury of exposing them to the test of time. So it's that third thing that we need to find.
Yeah, I mean, I guess our disagreement is very fundamental. Like, I think it's fundamental because I really do believe that religion has described exactly what we're going through, not in terms of the gritty detail, but in terms of pattern. That is, this is what we're talking about from the outset. We're talking about patterns. So there are patterns in cells, there are patterns in DNA, there are patterns in human behavior, and there are great patterns. There are large patterns of
Okay, so we're revisiting a particular spiral which we anticipated already, which is basically saying, look, the patterns already been laid out, patterns of behavior that'll lead you to be a good generation of people, which is what your religion is supposed to provide you. And it's there anticipating in a general way, anticipating these dangers that Mr. Brett Weinstein is concerned with. And the only thing that I can imagine that would replace or would be able to institute what Brett Weinstein is talking about is, again, another a chamber of lords or some kind of philosopher king. Maybe my imagination is not that strong. Anyone wish to hop on the panel and help me out here? What could possibly be the replacement that my friend Brett Weinstein is looking for that would update the missing aspects of religion? Our genes are leading us to disaster. Our genes, our biology, our desires, our instincts. Human history is evidence of this. The 20th century is littered, okay, with examples of us, trying to kill each other. So how can we overcome, okay? Religion, one such adaptation, which is meant to help us overcome and to actually push ourselves deeper into the future, is faulty, says Mr. Brett Weinstein. He says there's something missing. What could be added? is the question. What could be added? Do you have an answer to the question, sir? Mind checking your audio? Okay. Feel free to jump in whenever your audio situation. But now we have Mr. Peugeot reiterating the whole point of the patterns are there. Religions see the patterns. They're not going to give you the tools or the specifics. It's not going to be enough granularity. And well, is a technocratic world not good enough for what Brett Weinstein wants? Like a technocratic world that understands the particulars of the splitting of the atom and the DNA research and whatnot. Your audio is good now?
Repeat the question. I believe so. Although I hear music in the background, I guess that's the show.
That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, so the question is this, right? Mr. Brett Weinstein is whining about something that's missing from religions, okay? So he is being very open enough to grant religion, its status as an evolutionary adaptation, and so on and so forth, and open enough to see it symbolically as well, right? To understand, and also to seemingly to understand the psychology. But he's saying that there's something missing, that religion doesn't give us, doesn't teach us how to deal with the problems we're dealing with right now. And the question is, well, what can you imagine what Brett is looking for? Because it seems to me what Peugeot is saying about religion is good enough. It's like, dude, like religion just teaches you the patterns. It teaches you to go for the highest good. What more do you want? Other than some kind of council of chiefs, of which, Brett Weinstein is the head god of the earth. What is he talking about, right?
Well, before we dissect it, I have a couple questions. What good is religion doing or has done?
Well, okay. Insofar as, its status as an evolutionary adaptation, Brett Weinstein would say that these patterns, okay, and that now would have to broaden out religion, okay, that all these patterns that come in the form of thou shalt nots, a lot of times it's thou shalt not. It's usually thou shalt not, things you're not supposed to do. These edicts, okay, that form the religious behavior of people, tends to lead them to push their genes into the future more deeply. And we also talked about the fact that even religions that spread out, okay, to other parts, like Christianity, for example, what's the benefit of me spreading out my patterns of behavior, right, to others? And Brett would say, well, it actually makes the world more hospitable for you, right, when you spread out your pattern of being. So you're actually helping your genetics, right, that way as well. So point being, he is couching it in that evolutionary adaptation shelf, and he gives some evidence for it. The logic is not so crazy. Well, what do you have to say about that as an answer to the question of what good has religion done?
I still don't really understand what good religion has done. And I'm not so sure I understand Brett Weinstein's argument either. Can you try to condense it, make it more clear for me to understand before I respond to it?
Are you here to to put everything down on 2D paper? Is that?
Yeah. We have to make sure we're speaking the same language to our viewers.
No,
right?
I get it. You said I've been up here messing up, making a bad show, talking about patterns on the wall in space. DNA, double helixes that predict consciousness,
10,000 years. Right. What does all this mean? Right.
What does all this mean? Basically, it means, look, we're gonna die. We're gonna die if we don't overcome our genetics, if we don't overcome our primal nature, if we don't overcome our biology.
Right. So what is some of our primal nature that needs to be overcome? Do you mean propensity for tribalism, propensity for fighting over resources as opposed to
yes, because
sharing?
The genes wants to go ahead and push its spellings, its particular pattern, its genes into the future as much as possible. So my kin against your kin is the first and biggest and most dangerous aspect of the danger that the genes pose. Yes, correct.
Right. See, now we're getting somewhere, because now this makes sense, right? So can we, as a human species, overcome this? No. The only way we can overcome this is if we have genetic engineering. So where we understand enough of biogenetics to be able to weed out, when you smoke weed, you become more relaxed, right? That's anyway, to weed out some of these less desirable traits. The issue is obviously with biogenetic engineering is we don't really know, because there's tethers, right? Let's say you can't just uproot one root and say, okay, we've removed the weed. No, because the weed might actually be connected also to the root of the tree that's useful for something else. So, let's say you remove the propensity for fighting, right? Intertribal conflict, racism, whatever it is you guys call it in the West, right? In Africa, we call it tribalism. It's the same thing going on, right? If you remove this aspect, maybe you remove the aspect of familial succession. Maybe you remove the desire for people to even want to make a child and continue. So you may actually end up inadvertently killing yourself even before the thing that you're afraid of 10,000 years in the future.
Good. So let's go out there and let's paint the picture of what you're painting. You're saying, okay, cool. People not wanting to procreate anymore. Okay. Some kind of bland gray homogeneity in terms of what we believe and how we act and how we treat each other, and we all follow the dictum of safety, no flavor. If we actually solve this, and the point is, it would seem, now let me ask you a meta question about this conversation. Why does Brett Weinstein not get straight to this point in the conversation of like, look, I'm concerned with this violence aspect? No, because I've been teasing it, saying, look, what do you want other than you be God of the earth, right? And you tell us from an evolutionary standpoint what the next steps we need to take. You say, no, religion was good, blah, blah, blah. Now, there's another level where you can say maybe he's hoping to find some people like some intuitives on the other side of the aisle, let's say, like Jonathan Peugeot, right? Have conversations like this, and then maybe they can start their little cult or something. But either way,
right? Yeah. So
why doesn't he just get straight to the culting and to the leading already? Because that's what he's trying to lead, right?
Right. Because obviously it will look uncouth, right? He's trying to, he doesn't want to be accused like Jesus, right, of being a cultist. He wants to create the cult to a point whereby the cult is too big to even be called a cult. At that point, it's already gained some, political, intellectual, how do you call it? Street cred, right? It's actually supported by the intellectuals, the political scientists, the humanists. So the moment when he is a cult leader, at that point, it's already exploding in a more legitimate fashion, and he won't really be under the curse of a cultist leader, all the so-called negative associations. Now, if we look back at what he's really trying to say is, first of all, humans cannot ever evolve naturally to be devoid of these things which you might say is disadvantageous to a peaceful existence, especially when we have a high number of population, and also the propensity to be able to kill each other due to nuclear weapons and other destructive missiles technology that we've occurred. The issue here is we're in a constant tug of war. Hegelian principles of usefulness depending on the time frame. In the past, all these things, hence why we evolved them, were very useful, and they might be more useful in the future as they are as well. We can't really go around and evolve out of these situations. This is just never going to happen. Now, what you could do is you could create an artificial canvas, an artificial simulation whereby enough of the things that trigger people into being tribalistic to a point of annihilation,
like sports and the metaverse where you're out there sniffing coke and doing illegal things and
right, a universal basic income, all these things. That's why we're moving towards this more of a communistic sort of approach of where everyone has enough of the base instincts met. Therefore, you reduce the level of violence. In the West, however, you guys you have incels. There's no incels in Africa, right? Now, incels issue, you are going to see more men becoming more violent and less stable, because this is a base instinctual requirement that is required for men in order to participate in society. Because if you can't give them this, they will find other ways to exercise their will.
So we've put a lot on the table here. Let's let this guy finish what he's saying. Let's give Brett another chance to perhaps get closer to what he would like to see, because he's been saying, look, religion is not enough. It's like, Brett, what do you want? What would your religion look like? What would be the tenets of your... It's almost like he's trying to get them to write the rules of his cult so that they think it was their idea. And Brett is out there like, oh, it wasn't, I was just having, I was just... Yeah. See, to be honest, just a side thing, Brett is one of those people. There's a type of person, right, whom is, there's almost like, seems too good to be true, if you know what I mean, right? His brother Eric doesn't have that problem. Like Eric, you can see his dark side, right? You can be like, oh, I get Eric, I get that type. But Brett, you're like, where's Brett's dark side, right? It's
hey, they're the scariest ones, actually, you know.
Exactly, you know, it's like you don't quite. It just seems a little too good.
Let's say waxing and wanings of civilizations, waxing and wanings of different identities. And when we look at both, let's say the stories in Scripture, the prophetic text, we see that they're describing these patterns. And if we have the wisdom to see them as patterns, then we don't have to think even about the splitting of the atom. Because let's say a description of the pattern of excessive technical growth and excessive technical understanding, the danger of secret understanding and how that unleashes.
Is there any credence to what he's saying about the patterns and the warnings that that religions have given us? Have they served, a purpose? Because remember, that was the question that you asked, and are you skeptical as to what he's saying? Like, hey, religion tells us of these patterns, and tell about Noah's Ark and things like that. Got to build the ark while the sun is out. People will call you to blah 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 blah. But think about
that. Yeah, I mean, it tells us these. Yeah, go ahead.
Super chat. Super chat. Big Mac the Fisher in the building, $5. Thank you very much. You say quest! ! We have stiffed, not stifled. Okay, my astigmatism always messes that up. That those two, when I see them, I'm like, oh my God, is this stiffed or stifled? I'm gonna ruin it. We have stiffed it because of environmental dangers. Religion has discovered how to subdue the handwriting of quest in us. All right.
How do I ring handwriting?
Yeah, sorry for butchering that. But thank you very much for the super chat. Again, yeah, so the question was him talking about the patterns that religion has warned us about. The Tower of Babel, the mark of the beast, for example. We know these patterns, right? What do you say to that?
Yeah, we might know the patterns, but there's no evidence that we've learned anything from them, right? See, all these things which the religion predicted would happen have happened, right? So if they have happened,
has the same intuition
then
she's like, ain't nobody paying attention to pattern.
right. That's the point. It's like, okay. It's
only some potheads somewhere,
Right. It's like, oh man, 666. Man, they're gonna put chips in our hands and have a control GPS track of where we go, and you can't buy and trade. These things are happening, and they will happen. And the issue is, ain't no one paying attention to any patterns. So, religion hasn't done what he's saying it has the power to do, because there's no change. Perhaps you could argue that things would have been worse if we didn't have religion. Maybe it would have been regressed much sooner. It's something that you can say, but I don't even think that's accurate, because I think we wouldn't have even progressed very, very far without religion. So for us to have regressed without religion, it seems like a oxymoron.
Mm-hmm.
Is destruction on the world is something which has been described in many, many religious texts.
So then you're telling me that the wisdom that we already have points in a Luddite direction?
No, not necessarily, because the ultimate vision of the end of all things is, like I said, the heavenly Jerusalem. which is a perfect joining of technical reality and the garden, you could say. But
Right.
it's
So, yes, and this
Communist
is
utopia.
no, wait, hold on, shut up. This is a beautiful representation of the issue here. You see, nobody ain't paying no attention or whatever to patterns, and you saying that these patterns are not going to. So he's gonna describe something now about a pattern, okay, a vision, and it only appeals to the people who would perhaps be listening to this podcast right now or listening to things that are patterns for pattern's sake, ideas for ideas' sake, people who are open, perhaps people who have a philosophical bent, like to think about stuff, or maybe people who are rolling up a joint right now, smoking it on their way to bed, dealing with that, or popping a painkiller to deal with that arthritis, and listening to some musings, if you will. But this idea of this perfect patterns, and of which only me, the philosopher, can understand and see the good in, is somehow emanating goodness downward. Now I'm over here just being polemical and attacking him, but I don't know. Any comments?
No comments. I don't deal with the sequitous, and
Wow.
it's all about hierarchy. It's all about having it in the right order.
One
of the issues we have is the issue of materialism being in the wrong order. Is we see material gain and technical gain as being the God itself. That is, we run after it with abandon. We don't have a sense in which we have to judge on the value and the ultimate danger of these scientific discoveries. We just run amok, and then all of a sudden we realize the chaos which it's bringing. But that is because of a problem of hierarchy. Because we're not turned towards infinite love as the source of all things, and we don't see that the tools we set.
What
was this guy talking about? I mean, oh my God, what? Yeah, it's really cringe. It's what scientific discoveries are you gonna make if you think that the world is flat because you believe that it's more, preferred for you to maintain a certain belief system that was, created in a certain time period? It's my brain cells are falling through, right? I get what he's going through. He's making the Jordan Peterson argument, right? It's the truth of, truth defined under basically truth is something that is beneficial to the survival of the human species. Anything that's outside of that is not true, because then there wouldn't be us in order to even determine if it's true or not. So, having that hierarchy fine, that makes perfect sense. However, how are you going to make any discoveries, right? No one just created a nuclear bomb because, they're trying to make a bomb. It's because the science already existed and it would have happened anyways. Meaning, if the science exists, of course, all the, deviations would exist. And that's got nothing to do with, culture. You could say that human experiments are illegal around the world. And I get that. But if people want to do crazy things with humans, they can do it. There's no the science. You can't prevent science by having some authoritarian, autocratic rule against truth. That doesn't seem right.
Out in the world have to be bound by that attention. They have to be bound by that first direction. And so that's something which is described everywhere. It's described
it's not operationalizable. Okay, so let's take the obvious example from the recent past. Okay, gain of function research on viruses. This is a clear danger, which you, I think, will correctly describe as presaged by religious admonitions about technology. Okay.
Well, not just technology, but also, let's say, mixture of identity. You see that in the Old Testament laws, and you see it in descriptions of the developing of chimera that happened, before the flood, let's say, that kind of description.
Okay.
That kind of story.
There's a warning, if you know how to read it, in more than one religious text about something like gain of function research. Maybe that thing being encoded in our cultural identity is the reason that in 2015, the US Congress sought to ban gain of function research. And then Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak figured out a way around this in which they offshored the work to Wuhan.
Yeah.
Wuhan. Somehow even if the right idea made it to the right place to make the law to forbid the behavior, we still ended up.
It happened anyways.
Yeah, it happened anyways. So my point is, it's one thing when that happens with, first century technologies. It's another thing when it happens with, 21st century technologies. And it's the 21st century technologies that are giving me the sense of urgency.
Okay, so it seems as though this guy really is just arguing for a more authoritarian lean to things without never really saying it.
Yeah,
it's interesting. So this is Brett's dark side. Huh? He's actually crazier than his brother. This guy just wants.
Right.
This guy, because I don't see. Otherwise, I would not see the argument. Anyways, patterns on patterns. Earlier, somebody said something about faith, which is Jonathan Peugeot said that faith is the layer either below or above your level of analysis, right? Basically, that thing which you have to take for granted. And is that a useful definition of faith? If my question makes sense to you? This is something I'm trying to get at when people say things like that.
Right. It's interesting.
saying-
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess
So
faith is
I understand-
just patience then by that argument, because
You say
there's
patience?
really nothing else. Patience. The argument he's made is faith as patience, because the more classical definition of faith is more of willingness to wait for something that is unseen but hoped for. And
Okay,
there's
so
some kind of, right. This one is a little bit more of patience. It's like, okay, I can't see beyond the stars. I'm just going to be patient until whatever else I'm doing around my world meets up and hopefully goes the right way. It's just patience. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say the point is, let's say not that. Okay, so forget the whole patience thing, and let's stick with the idea of there's separate levels, right? There's separate levels of and to go from one level to the next, you need faith. That if I'm looking at an apple, okay, that is a very kind of image heavy type argument I'm making here. I'm looking at an apple, and that's one level of analysis. We're just talking about simple scale now, okay? If I go scale down and I start looking at the molecules, right, that there's a certain level of faith that I have to go in between the level of apple and molecules, that these things are still part of the same thing. And when I'm at the level of molecule, I'm never at the level of apple. And when I'm at the level of apple, I'm never at the level of molecule. And I'm always going back and forth from level to level, but having faith. But there's an ultimate faith background, which is, that the existence itself, right? That ultimate axiom back there. But that it's all these levels of faith, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying. I'll probably characterize it not using the word faith. I'll characterize it as a passive obedience to probabilistic attenuations of matter. Okay, that doesn't make any more sense. I'll just classify it as basically obedience to passive nature of materials. Basically, what do you guys call it? It's called the automation, right? It's just automation, obedience to automation. Because it can't be consciousness. Because what you're describing there is different levels of consciousness, right? You can't be conscious to everything. You can't experience the apple and the molecules and the saccharine and the sugar and the sucrose and then existence all at the same time. You just can't. You choose to kind of take other aspects of it, being for granted. Automation. You basically automate being, and then you choose to focus on a particular lens. So I still don't want to call that faith, because it is. I get where you're going with it, because that's more of a pragmatic look of the term.
Why do people? Yeah, go ahead. You said pragmatic. Why do people give such definitions? So I was trying to get that because that's what he came at. He's coming with this set of tools to the playground. He says, "Here's what I'm going to call faith." What kind of game? What is it? What's the setup for people who do this? Is it some kind of pragmatism, or go ahead with that?
There might be a sense of trying to say that there's nothing wrong with putting power and controlling people in a way because it's all pragmatism. That could be an element of there. It's like because if it's too woo, there's that element of anyone can make an argument to kind of preserve whatever virtues that they have. But if you kind of reduce it to pragmatism, you have more power to sort of act on them. And if they buy into become ideologically possessed, you have power over them. So it could be a power play. That's one element of it.
Yeah. Also, is a way of kind of shall we say, just expanding the playground for saying, look, I have a more sophisticated understanding of faith. Because here's the thing about these topics. Okay, there is, in other words, a religion, okay, and faith could be discussed at this level, but it could also be discussed at the level of someone whom is illiterate, right? They could also talk about religion and faith. So I don't know why I brought that up, but there's something interesting about that fact, though. That
oh,
go ahead.
Right. No, I agree with you there. But there's also that element of if this person, see, in my head, I'm thinking they would have said both arguments. They would have said, okay, this is faith, and then it also has the element of woo encapsulated and the metaphysics that gives you hope in order to sort of be patient enough so that whatever other stuff that you're doing, for example, it's like business, right? People in general lack the understanding of business because they can't project themselves into the future. They don't have faith that me getting my carpentry license and me getting my my driving license for HVC vehicles or something is going to then allow me to be able to build this dream company or house or get this type of wife. There's a lack of faith there because they think that anything and everything is going to come and a whole monsoon is going to drag everything away. And this is why a lot of people, especially Africans, don't really know how to do business. They can't project stability into the future. They don't have the faith to be able to do that.
Yes, lack of faith. My people perish for lack of knowledge, O ye of little faith. Okay, yeah. So you're basically saying the short-term thinking, okay, and all the behaviors that go along with short-term thinking are they're manifold and dangerous out there. Many things that have to do with that short-term thinking, not being able to see. It leads people to be thieves. Almost because they don't.
No, 100%.
They cannot guarantee a system. They see something, they grab it because they're like, "Who knows 100%. When this thing's gonna show up again?" No way of projecting stability into the future. Meaning politically, because I'm beginning to learn of myself now that I'm a political animal. I always come down to the level of politically that means no institutions, right? That's what it means, because institutions are the mechanisms by which anything societally propagates. So now, Jonathan Peugeot talking about a pattern that way. You have given him some kind of, you were kicking him, he was down, you were saying he was saying things he wasn't quite saying, but what do you, given the conversation between Brett Weinstein and Jonathan Peugeot, what are some of the good sides of Jonathan? You can talk about his personality or his arguments, which was basically to say, look, it's mainly about patterns and consciousness, and religions have given us enough of the information, or and religion is not opposed, obviously, to evolution or any other thing. It's not supposed to be science and all these other kinds of things. What do you have to say about the performance of Jonathan Peugeot?
I mean, he's intuitive, right? He's out here talking about how he perceives the future, and he's kind of giving a lot of credence to religion. And I think he's a very intelligent guy. Obviously, I think there is a little bit too much, reliance on woo, even though there isn't quite a strong.
Give people your definition of woo, by the way, because woo, it all resides. within the same
Oh, okay,
arena
the
of
same.
woo, but your woo is quite technical. What do you mean when you
Right,
say
right,
woo?
right. Yeah. So when I'm saying woo, okay, it's like he believes that all these patterns, understanding them, reading them, seeing the past civilizations and all the warning states of the Epic of Gilgamesh or Noah's flood. He believes that these things are good enough to actually allow us human beings to be able to perceive difference in them, and then
See that we
also
have.
project in the future perfect states of utopic type of reasoning. He basically thinks that you could pragmatize these patterns into something that
Yeah.
is quite
So there's
concrete
a over
to an
belief.
extent, right?
So the woo people are, it's a certain kind of airheaded Platonist. Okay. Now, not that we call him Mr. Peugeot that, but we're saying that a way to kind of couch your definition of woo is there's a belief in patterns, okay, and an over belief in patterns. Now you're kind of floating out there in space, okay, not so empirical, or you're just
Okay,
over
let
there
me give an
talking about.
example, right?
Go ahead.
It's
Go ahead.
let's use a very pedestrian example. If you want to end child marriage, right? Some woo person will say we have to educate people not to sell their kids for marriage, right? That's not really gonna stop it if you haven't actually tackled the underlying causes, which might be poverty, culture, and the fact that legally it's allowed. You have to tackle it from all angles, right? You do the woo thing, which is educate them, because when you educate someone, you hope that they're going to, listen to the thing that you've told them why it's wrong. That's woo, right? Education is a real thing, right? If you tell an engineer and you make them study engineering, but you kind of you abstract that he's going to be able to build the right bridge, but that's not necessarily true unless you also build building codes, and you also put legislations and irregularities there so that things can be standardized. So the woo part is the education. The practical part is all the other things that would affect the flow.
Good. Indeed.
What's more, let me just put one more thing on the table. Let's take, I believe that it is true that fission power based on uranium is a dead end. I could argue why that is, but let's put that for another time. Let's just say there are problems with uranium-based fission power that I believe are insurmountable in the foreseeable future. Whereas fusion power, which is very difficult, which we have not yet usefully generated electricity with, right? We haven't gotten a self-sustaining fusion reaction good enough to be scaled up. But likely, the salvation of humanity depends on us achieving that, right? And therefore freeing ourselves from battling over things like fossil fuels. But we don't yet have the wisdom to deploy it. If you deployed fusion power, if we discovered it tomorrow and we just deployed it under current political regimes, it would compound our problem rather than solve it. Yeah, probably. Okay, so let's say that those things are true. They don't have to be true for the purposes of this argument, but they could be true.
Right.
If they are true, we don't have the wisdom in the religious texts that you're talking about, or the religious traditions from which they come, to know how to navigate our way away from uranium fission and towards fusion power with an upgraded political modality that would allow us to deploy it safely.
Yeah, well, religion offers the reason.
So if we read backwards into what he's saying, he wants a system, okay, that is going to tell us the modality to upgrade fusion power and so on and so forth. All political power and stuff like this is not something that any theocracy could even control, right? Even if you were a theocracy, what would your religion have to say about how you do these types of things? And these are the realm of energy and the realm of military, right? So Brett is still being disingenuous, but really he wants the power to be able to tell us where to get our energy from.
It offers the reason why you'd want to do that. Religion offers the notion that if you attend to the highest good, then you will make the right decisions downstream. But if all you care about is that everybody has two cars and is materially comfortable, if that's the purpose, then you're already not attending to the highest good, right? That's already the problem is already there at the outset, which is that one of the problems of the modern world is that we think that material comfort, and I say that like I live in a house, like I live with modern material comfort, but we believe that material comfort is good itself. And that's what is causing the biggest problem, because it's a huge problem. what you're saying. But the bigger problem is that if we continue to act as if material good is the only good, then there's no way that billions of people in the world can all have 2 cars and a pool and a air-conditioned house. Like, we know that that's not scalable. And so there's actually a problem of value. There's a problem of value, which will then downstream make us decide differently if we are aligned properly.
Let's go back to the original question. Can we overcome, and what ways can we overcome, and what ways can we not overcome our genes? Is Brett's point of looking at the goal that our genes have set for us and saying that they're bad, is there a problem with that? Is there what place are you standing from to make these judgments if you're just a tool of the genes problem? What do you have to say about the overall thing of transcending the genes?
Yeah, I think like I said, I don't think it's possible through metaphysics to transcend genes. Those who are already sort of able to transcend, basic humanistic behaviors and tribalism and all these chaos and materialism, that's their genes which predicated all that to begin with. So that's not transcending anything. That's just reaching a peak in human evolution, dictated by your genes. And the people who can't, obviously they can't. That's who the problem is. I'll say no, you can't transcend your genes. What you can do, however, is you can be aware of it, and then we can build systems based on the conceptions of being and the evaluation of pragmatic ways to ensure being is forever. What I mean by this is this. In math, we have mathematical proofs. Very smart people who know math come together and decide if something is just conjecture or if it's a real proof. We need the same thing set at the highest level when it comes to policies, the technologies, and government, level sort of instructions to decide the future of our species.
I think Leibniz had an idea, such an idea. I was thinking of some artificial intelligence people kind of study some of the things that he thought about. He had a lot of musings while he was not inventing calculus, because only Isaac Newton did. Hell with Leibniz. But the idea of AI, which is kind of what you're saying, right? AI coming in and giving us the answer. How about that? Is AI going to be that mathematical equation for the law that decides every case on the law, decides case of
right.
Public policy and jurisprudence and whatnot?
Exactly. And then obviously what you do is you have humans to sort of just argue out the different sort of contradictions that the AI might produce. So the AI gives you a really good model, and then really smart people come together and say, okay, based on what we value right now and our jurisprudence and all that nonsense, this is the direction we want to go.
Now, in your view, do you share Brett's concern with about the dangers that humanity faces? You could say, hey, it's always dangerous, for example. Do you share his concern that it's particularly dangerous right now and something is happening? He has perhaps something which he has not explained to me, which I don't fully understand, in the sense that there's an evolutionary lens that gives him also a particular reason, right? So he has this crazy, probably TI reason, right? Evolutionarily, as why we're in some particular nexus, why that's very dangerous, right? Trusting him as the type of person he is. But do you share his fear?
Fear, no, because I won't be here, right? So it doesn't really affect me. But do I share his reasoning for why he's here?
So no, doesn't affect me. You better respect me, huh? Because I come with the tech, G. Anyways, man, sorry.
The technique would have been quite nice too.
Because I come with the technique. I blast. No, go ahead.
I blast cap niggas through the left knee. But anyways, so I don't really share the fear, but I understand why he is fearful. Meaning, I can project why, he would say what he says from a logical perspective. I just don't have the fear because I'm not going to be here. Now, I will say this though. it really depends on how the world goes. If the world enters into a world government situation, then there is no fear. The issue is if we remain with our current political structure of Russia, NATO, and all the other countries vying for resources, when there's different states of power with equally destructive forces such as nuclear weapons, that's the only reason to fear. But if you have a world government, I don't think really there's much fear there, because they're going to be controlling people as opposed to trying to get rid of people as a whole.
So where you are now with the likelihood of nuclear war within the next, let's say, 100 years, give me a percentage likelihood of nuclear weapons. Well, and not world-ending crap. Maybe it could be tactical, or they call some of them theater nuclear warheads. Small tactical nukes here and there to make people shape up.
I actually believe in the next 100 years we'll have discovered a nuke level weaponry that won't leave behind the radiation, and I think that is very likely. But I don't think the current nuclear warheads, as they are with all the nonsense that it brings,
is likely. And I think that's where we want to go. We're trying to get to. We're pretending like, we're trying to scale down, but if we actually had, as you said, that explosive power without the radiation, right? That's where we want to go, huh?
Right. That's where I think we'll reach. Give it the next 20 years. That's where we're going to be. 20, 30 years.
Yeah, shout out to Attack on Titan.
Right, exactly. Nuclear weapons, they're using, giant man-eaters. But yeah, I do think that it's very likely that we will end up in some kind of nuclear level war. However, I don't think there will be the radiation thing to consider, because I think that's the main issue why I doubt that either side is going to really do it, because it's like, even if you win and both sides have been hit, you're going to end up giving birth to kids that have 20 toes and 2 heads. It's not something which people want in general.
Yeah, the radiation thing, it puts things in a special category. It's like, let's say, chemical weapons, for example. The reason why they're banned, the reason why we don't mind if you kill civilians and military people with, just good old fire, right? Just if you just burn them down nice and clean, but don't be using chemicals.
Right, it's on its own category.
We prefer a nice roast on the meat. It can't be like, we don't want the meat to be spoiled.
We wanted to have less antioxidants, right? I mean, more antioxidants.
Or whatever, less GMO attached to this cooking process. But it's because there's a visceral aspect to that whole chemical or gassing people, and presumably we tried it once, World War I, right? And we saw it, and it was enough to be like, nah, F this, like.
Yeah, because I mean, neither side wants to use it. It's like, okay, look, get shot in the head, fine, you'll die. Get your hand chopped off, you'll bleed to death maybe, or if you're lucky or unlucky, you'll get saved. But suffocating, your insides are rotting up.
Whatever, your eyes are bleeding out, and everything is
and it's slow. It's just like, no, let's just leave it out. So there's that element of torture and experience that we've kind of collectively agreed that this probably isn't the right thing, because if you were caught using these weapons, right, and you lost the war, you're going to be put under crazy criminal court and probably sentenced to death or something. So there's that kind of understanding that, hey, there's a legal and illegal war, and if you lose, unfortunately, you're going to have to suffer the consequences, and they're going to be worse if you did things like that.
Yeah, so we're talking about morality here. Okay, we're talking about morality and drawing the line, okay, on behavior. And we drew the line on chemical weapons, and we say, well, how did we come to that line? There's another, and in there we touched upon this theme of being clinical about something. So I said, give them a clean roast. It's better than, chemical weapons. Let's talk about the death penalty, because it's just adjacent to this right here, okay? Again, talking about the dangers and the darker sides of our nature is this, right? With our genes pushing us to extinction, can we transcend? No, we cannot. So far, okay. Now, there's a question of being clinical with death. Some cultures, okay, would say you're gonna kill this person, okay, chop their head off. Some cultures argue about the right amount of whatever barbiturate they're gonna use mixed with whatever other muscle relaxer and paralyzing agent is, is a humane or correct, or what's going on with the people whom argue about how clinically you kill somebody. Both societies have decided, okay, and these two societies are not arguing about whether or not this person deserved death. Okay, society A said this person is, yeah, kill him. Society B, same scenario, yes, kill this person. But society B is all clinical about how they kill. And it's got to be this, and it's got to be right, and we got to put on our gloves correctly. And this is true. Okay, you may not be, you're not in the United States, but there's a case law all through the appellate court system and the Supreme Court about, the right ways and the wrong ways to kill people, and what's, what do you think is going on there with this clinically killing someone, and what's the difference, and what's the big deal?
Yeah,
why don't you just do it publicly, like back in the day? You just go out there, shoot them publicly, let the town square, let everybody come watch.
Like Saudi Arabia, just chop someone's head off.
That's the extreme. Society A, chop their head off. So society A, to send them out there, let them watch, shoot them. You're killing them. But no, we killed them in a white room, clinically with leather straps. Okay. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of dehumanization, because I think if you chop someone's head off, you're humanizing them. If you shoot them, while looking at them in the face, you're humanizing them. So being clinical, you're dehumanizing them so that you don't quite feel the lack of empathy. What you want to do is you want to pretend that you're being empathic by reducing the pain.
Oh my God.
But in reality, you're dehumanizing them.
I love it. So it's actually not even for the benefit of the person. You're not actually being civilized. You're pushing yourself. You're becoming a machine. Like you're becoming a killing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Like you're removing every inconvenience. Like I don't want to look at your face when I kill you because it makes me upset. I don't want to think about you as a human being. So that's rather interesting. Yep. So the people whom claim that they're more civilized and that they're more humane and they have the Geneva Convention and they are the West and all these other kinds of things, and they're quite clinical with their killing, are actually just being killing machines, more effective, efficient killing machines.
Exactly.
And the whole exercise is exercising selfishness. Interesting. Okay. That's someone should investigate that. But it is something that I always found interesting about the whole question of, now, first of all, we cannot leave here without asking you, death penalty, right? Where do you stand on that?
Obviously I'm against it.
In the law, are you an anarchist of some kind? Well, go ahead.
I don't even believe in it. Okay, so yeah, I don't believe in the law. It's the most retarded thing ever. It's a bunch of idiots come together to decide if you're guilty or not. It makes no sense at all, right? I've never, even when I was a child, I've looked at cases, I'm like, this is retarded. It just reminds me of Game of Thrones, trial by combat. You get a lawyer, aka your fighting agent, to fight another fighting agent, and hey, look, if they win, you're innocent. It makes no sense when it comes to truth. However, am I for or against, let's say, killing people? No, just simply because the state is going to be wrong, and you're going to kill people who don't want to die and were innocent.
And that is bad, because I tend to agree in that particular construct in terms of looking at, well, is it worse to kill an innocent person, right? I think it is worse, because I think the killing of the guilty person is more like a choice thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not
right.
This is something we're doing for our convenience or
right.
you get what I'm saying? Going to kill an innocent person over that that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, especially if the innocent
But it
person doesn't
happens.
want to die.
But it happens, right? And
Right.
it's happened.
Of course,
I'm sure.
of course.
And
I mean,
I'm
many
sure
times. Right.
yeah, it's happened many times that are known, and I'm sure it's happened. The ones that are
Countless
never
many other
known.
times which were not known. Right.
Exactly.
So that's my issue there. It's like it now becomes a game of power as opposed to justice. Because you can't go around saying, okay, I believe in justice. Yes, yet within the justice system, there's a big gaping hole that allows for injustice. You could have incompetence, just happen, miscarriage of justice. But when the actual system itself is unjust, because it allows the potential, not just potential, but the actuality of innocent people who don't want to die. Again, there's difference between innocent people and innocent people who actually don't mind dying. Because if they don't mind dying, it's fine. But innocent people who don't want to die, and then they get pulled up into this whole thing, that's now the issue. Or it gets utilized as a system of power, as a symbol of power, depending on the corruption of that system. That's sort of the issues. Unless we have, perfect GPS tracking devices with the mark of the beast in our hands, we have cameras everywhere, and the cameras are incorruptible, right? And there's DNA evidence. If you have like that rate where it's like 99.99999999999% infinity, fair enough. I'm not against it. But as we are right now, as
Okay, so the reason you're not against it, okay, which doesn't necessarily mean you're for it, but what are the
I don't really care
kind of
for
satisfaction part that you may care for, or is it
no,
a
not really.
deterrent?
Like even if someone killed me, or killed my dog or something, I wouldn't really care enough to kill them. It's like I would want to kill them myself, right? I would.
Yeah. So
I
there's a
wouldn't
difference
want
between
the states to be involved.
Okay, cool. So you're saying there's a difference between I'm in the heat of the moment situation with you, okay, and you just killed something or did something, and I killed you, right? That's one thing, right? Versus me going down, sitting, filling out paperwork, and spending tax dollar money to try to kill you in a white room somewhere.
In a clinical, yeah. In fact, I wouldn't even be happy with that, right? I'll be like, what the hell? This is weird. Like, it has to be in the heat of the moment. I've just caught them having monkey double backflips with my dog or something. And then right now I'm so angry. And, right. That's why.
Pull your dog up. Okay,
right.
okay.
That's justice.
So,
this whole right room, pushing papers, getting some other external things to get involved. I'm not ready for that.
Okay, so speaking about the law here, I want to check this out. This guy was a very successful defense. Would you be a defense attorney? Is the question. You don't have to answer it right now, right? But whom would you defend, right?
Firing line.
Because a good one defends some of the worst people, right?
Tonight,
and this guy you see here on your screen is top-notch defense lawyer. Well, not this one, but the guy's good. Yeah,
just write to F. Lee Bailey, care of the station, and send lots of money. Because the defense of people who commit murders or are charged with having done so is very costly. And not the least cost is paying for the invaluable services of Mr. Bailey, who, although he is only in his early 30s, is already being compared to the great criminal defense lawyers in American history. Mr. Bailey has been much in the news lately on account of his spectacular successes in springing famous clients and in keeping others from the courtroom. Until Mr. Bailey came along, the friends of Dr. Sam Shepard had despaired of getting him out of jail. Until Mr. Bailey took the case for Dr. Capolino, it looked very blue for the man charged with murdering his wife and his mistress's cuckold. The Boston Strangler is said safely to be in Mr. Bailey's hands. Indeed, he is a man of such ferocious talent and energy that he may yet decide to empty the prisons in alphabetical order.
All right. We get it. So he's pretty good, and he's pretty proud of himself there. But would you?
Yeah.
Would you be this guy, for example? We haven't gotten into some of the details yet, but would you go out there and be like, because you said you're not a big fan of the legal system.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like a game, right? And I'll play the best game possible. Yeah, okay. That's the thing, right? It's a game, and the thing is, right? Let's say in a system that functions and that's not corrupt, all you have to do is just put prove what do you call it, something of a doubt, right? There's a doubt that this person actually committed this crime, and all you have to do that is just by showing weaknesses in the other side's storyline. You know, it's like if you got a great alibi, hey, that helps. If there's no DNA, oh, that's great. If there's no witnesses or witnesses are, you know, unreliable, they had drug abuse or whatever it is, then, you know, it just reminds me of science, but this time is you're picking and choosing which facts to follow. So yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as writing a scientific research paper. You're just following a narrative.
Yes, yes, yes. And Dr. Aubrey de Grey, focusing on yes, I've heard of him. This is to Never Again. And the whole idea of aging and how we can combat aging and telomeres or whatever and all that kind of stuff is something that fascinates me and that I kind of dig into from time to time. Yes, yes, yes. But anyways, so defense attorney, okay, you would be one. Yeah, I think I could do it. And I will, you know, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it at this level of like, you know, getting, you know, high profile murder type stuff and getting. Anyways, let's see.
The problems of crime enforcement, the bearing of the existing laws and the role of the advocate. Ms. Bailey, the press reported that you decided to permit, or rather not to permit, Dr. Shepard in his new trial to take the stand. It is correct, I assume, that his right to decline to appear is an extension of the Fifth Amendment privilege. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, and that is a change in the Ohio law since the first trial. If the same rule had obtained, I would have had to put him on the stand because his silence would have counted against him. This time it did not.
When you say it doesn't count against you, do you mean that the jury is told that psychologically it must not count against you?
I'm sure psychologically it does. The rule is that they are told that they are to attach no inference to the silence of the defendant.
Well,
What do you think about these kinds of jury instructions? Here's one that was just implied in there, basically telling the jury that, hey, this box you just saw, you're supposed to cancel it from your memory, right? That is the cartoon version, okay? But basically, in this case, it's to say, look, if somebody refuses to testify, don't hold it against them, right? What do you think about that, Dr. K? Right? What kind of crazy psychological games are people playing here? The court says it knowing fully well that it'll still affect them, and what do you think about this?
Right. You know, yeah, I think he actually answered it already. Like, it's basically, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, of course it has a psychological effect, and they're gonna think that, you know, they're guilty or not guilty. True that, but when they're now, you know, discussing amongst each other, legally they can't mention it. So whatever arguments that they're espousing within each other, they have to ignore all of the other arguments, and that can lead to a different answer when it comes to, you know, because they have to reason it out and, you know, give, you know, credible answers. It's not just, oh well, raise your hand. Who do you think is guilty? It's like, oh, these are the sets of arguments, X, Y, Z. So yeah, it does have the impact psychologically, but they can't use it during the, you know, the argumentation with each other.
Yeah, it's good that you can use it. So basically, you can only give your reasons in a particular form, or there has to be, you can only give principled reasons or within the law, that kind of stuff. Again, let's see.
Is this psychologically possible to do?
No.
That is to say, if you have a jury who sees somebody there, defendant, and knows that he would like to see certain questions asked of him, what in fact happens psychologically to that juror?
I'm sure he draws an inference from it, despite all of the eloquence of both counsel and the court on the point.
Now, you are, I gather, very much in favor of maintaining at all times the right of the individual not to have to answer questions that might be self-incriminating. Is that correct?
Yes, but that isn't really the reason we keep people off the stand. They have stories to tell. Just as a jury can't help but draw an inference from silence, they never believe the defendant. When he's on trial for murder, a perjury indictment is hardly a deterrent from falsification. And it's really just sort of a game.
If you were charged with murder, you're going to go up and lie anyways. Anyways, go ahead. What are you going to say?
Yeah, no, I think he has, you know, he's looking at it very clinically. I think he's one of you guys, actually. He has to be a TE person. He's using the evidence, the logic of what happens, and, you know, all the inferences. He's not out here trying to say, oh, well, you know, what if he's a really good, tall-looking, kind-faced murderer? He's not going to go down there and start doing the TI and FE. He's just out there focusing on, well, no. People don't believe murderers or people being accused of murder. If, you know, already got past this point to the police, assuming there's no corruption, people aren't going to really believe them. In fact, and also I think the other guy asked, do you think it's going to count against them? I kind of think he basically half said yes, and he didn't really say no. And exactly kind of said like people kind of tell on themselves. That was what I was hearing when he was speaking. I'm not too sure if he said it or not, but you don't want to just keep speaking because you end up just saying shit that is irrelevant, or you're gonna purge.
Welcome to the legal half of the show, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, so we're now inadvertently we got here somehow, but so I have a point. I'm gonna when it comes to speaking to the cops, right, or talking at all in America, okay, the rule basically is shut up, right, and they tell you right there in the Miranda rights, right. There's a reason why it's right there. Because America is the land of rights, right? That's how we kind of understand ourselves politically. I know my rights, these rights, those rights, these amendments, right? And we talk about the right to remain silent. And that one is what do you have to, so basically don't talk to the police is huge, and still many people fall for it in America. That's why you have all these interrogation tapes out there on YouTube where people are just talking to the cops. Like there is nothing, you cannot get anything good out of it, right? Because it doesn't matter that even if the police thinks, oh, you must be guilty because you didn't talk to me. It doesn't matter.
It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
there's a whole process that has to happen.
Irrelevant.
The court, you don't gain anything because the thing is all this. Because here's one thing that I didn't think about: the fact when you talk to the police. And now the cop becomes a witness in the trial that they can call in to the witness stand as a way of presenting certain evidence and facts, right? And that never looks good on you. So the point is, never talk to them. Go sleep in the jail until they assign you a lawyer, or you call your lawyer or whatever, okay? And then handle it that way. Having just simply talking to them, even if you say, I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to say this much. Now this guy, they can call him up and say, okay, on the whatever, what did he say? He said yes, he did park the brown car, right? And here's another reason why you never talk, okay? Because you may be thinking, okay, well, this is just a jaywalking ticket that I got, so I'm going to answer questions. And yes, I did have the brown car in the intersection of 5th and Main. Meanwhile, there's an investigation about a murder, okay, about a brown car on 5th and Main, and you're over here talking about stuff. Now, that's a stretch. But there are other laws that you don't know that you're breaking. Let's say, for example, when it comes to the IRS or so on and so forth. Anyways, I'm layering and layering and layering on reasons why you need to shut up. But what are your thoughts about the whole shut up thing? And the fact as the American rule.
Yeah, right. See, in America, you can, and I agree with you 100%. You should shut up. In other places like Africa, they'll threaten you if you don't speak to them. And then they will deny you the lawyer for a long time until you've spoken to them. So let's leave that out for a second. But yeah, the American situation, what they do is they play a psychological game on you because, they assume, you've never been arrested before. You don't know the system. You don't really know the rules. Like, the police bearing, whether they think you're guilty or not, is irrelevant. If it gets to court, it's going to be a whole trial, right? And whether the police thinks it is completely powerless. There's no inference at all to whether you're innocent. Now, what you could do is you could put the police on your case or less on your case. But either way, if you are actually innocent, then there's nothing that they're going to find, assuming things are, somewhat clean. And if you are guilty, hey, you're actually better off not speaking. So either way, if you're innocent, great. Yeah. There's nothing else that they can come up with. And if you are guilty, great. You're not going to incriminate yourself.
Here's the only rule, the general rule that I can say about it, which is this. If you can see the end game, like the worst possible outcome, it's clear to you that, look, this is not going to get me into a murder trial or murder investigation on 5th and Main or something like that. This is just a straight up simple type deal, right? And the worst thing that could possibly happen is I'm going to get a ticket for $50. You get what I'm saying? $50 that I can then go to traffic school and erase. If you have a situation where the worst case that can happen, you already can see, then you can talk to the cops. But other than that, don't. There's a reason why they gave you those. Why it came through up because it is basically part of the Fifth Amendment, right? The right not to incriminate yourself, right? So, and it wasn't always interpreted down. It didn't trickle down from the Constitution to the states neatly until at some particular point. Uh, and now they can't abuse it anymore. But anyways, let's
reason we
see.
keep people off the stand, they have stories to tell. Just as a jury can't help but draw an inference from silence, they never believe the defendant. When he's on trial for murder, a perjury indictment is hardly a deterrent from falsification. And it's really just sort of a game to see if the prosecutor having a crack at him can break him. But I almost prefer the old English system where the defendant could not testify, and that eliminates the question.
Well, you say it eliminates the question because then nobody feels that he's entitled to the temptation to wanting to ask him something.
Gentlemen, may we interrupt very briefly? We'll continue this discussion in just a moment.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Bailey, then, as a more theoretical question. Do you believe that the right to refuse to
The good old days when you could smoke on television.
testify is a right that's integral to the whole process of the presumption of innocence?
Yes, it's as integral as it is illogical.
As it is what?
Illogical.
Why is it illogical?
Well, the most efficient way to try a man is to put him on the stand first and ask him what he knows about the case. Then if more evidence is needed, we can put that on too. The defendant always knows, except in very rare cases of clear insanity, whether or not he is guilty, or at least whether or not he committed the acts charged. His degree of guilt may be fixed with some inference or some judgment by the jury, but he would be the easiest source of information, no question about it. And in some countries, he's called first.
Well, do you understand yourself to be an advocate of the cause of defendants?
Just an advocate. I could try the case from either side of the fence,
Oh,
hopefully.
I'm sure you could, technically. But if you were an advocate, let's say, of the cause of the prosecution, might you find yourself concocting some very eloquent reasons to limit the uses of the Fifth Amendment?
No, I think not. And I doubt that many prosecutors would want to wipe it out. It might make their job a little easier, certainly much more vicious, but it is an important cornerstone of the democracy.
Prosecutorial misconduct of which you are experiencing something similar, but this is not prosecutorial misconduct. But anyways, prosecutors do a lot of foul stuff, and in the sense that, number one, there's politics attached to their job. They have to be the district attorney has to be elected. I believe so, right? And even if it wasn't about that, it's a political position, or shall we say, it's a prominent position, and you have to win trials or a win or lose thing. And so what they will do is, for example, withhold evidence, for example, that we're supposed to share with through, in other words, all kinds of tactical mistakes or whatever, right? Maneuverings, technicalities, they can mess up something and knowingly put an innocent person in jail, for example, or not want to, step back. They will double down. This happens, right? And that part, I don't think people kind of, because people think, oh, maybe it was the cops that got you. It's like sometimes the whole prosecutor and the whole system, they're hiding files.
Yeah. Or second suspect, and then they're just focusing on you. They're going in for the kill when they know at this point this is very unlikely that this is the person. And yeah, this happens a lot. This is where you could argue the leftists will say, hey, you should put these people in prison for these prosecutorial misconducts, hiding information and data, and all that kind of stuff. That's an argument.
See, we live on, and I doubt that any conscientious lawyer would want to see it stricken down.
Well, suppose I name a conscientious lawyer who wants to see it stricken down. Does that mean that he isn't conscientious as of this moment on?
It means he's got a battle on his hands with me.
Which I'm sure he wouldn't welcome. But if the point I'm trying to get at is that the very fact that you stress that the right of a witness to deny information that may have to do with the establishing the matter of his guilt or not guilt is illogical, suggests that people who are logically concerned to get at the truth of a man's guilt or innocence ought to be opposed to certain uses of the Fifth Amendment now.
Yes, but the prices you pay for the expediency of wiping out the Fifth Amendment privilege are far too high. Immediately you have inquisitions, Star Chamber proceedings.
Why?
Well, because
why couldn't you eliminate the Fifth Amendment but also forbid Star Chamber proceedings?
because the police process of interrogation has so far ingrained its system that the police have forgotten how to investigate. Much more reliable than a defendant's story, and you can get a story from a man one way or another if you work on him long enough, almost any story you want. The extrinsic or circumstantial facts that can be brought to bear with the testimony of impartial witnesses. And the history of mankind shows that the danger in the use of a man's statement against himself is likely to produce more injustice than it is to further justice.
Well, that's certainly an interesting generality. But what about the witness where the impartial witnesses, the defendant, in a situation where the impartial witnesses are dead, like the strangled women in Boston?
Yes.
Yes.
But what about that situation?
Well,
the Commonwealth is not faced with a problem there. They have the confessions.
The extrinsic evidence that you're looking for is simply dead and unavailable in a situation like that.
That's true.
So therefore, you would tend to defend the Fifth Amendment simply on the grounds that its abrogation would end up doing more mischief than good for society.
Oh, yes, and I'm satisfied of that. Remember, the Fifth Amendment isn't invoked in every situation. Many defendants do confess voluntarily, as this one did, to get it off his chest or because he realizes he's dangerous. And the fact that a bunch of racketeers go into the grand jury and take the Fifth Amendment doesn't bother me at all. They have given away their position and eventually will get caught. Investigation is diligent.
Well,
Speaking of serial killers, do you think it's a cultural thing?
100%, but not just cultural. I'll say also, it's predicated by the development of a society or lack thereof as well, but also cultural. Meaning there might be societies which may be very well developed, but still not engaged with subsequent numbers as other cultures which are equally developed. There are not many African serial killers, right? Unless you want to, consider a cannibal a serial killer. But I would argue a cannibal is just someone who wants to eat flesh as opposed to, just killing them. Death isn't the point of a cannibal killing people. It's more of the, I need this person dead so that I can eat them kind of situation.
So serial killer is more of a higher level,
philosophical,
Epicurean.
Exactly. Yeah, and certain cultures just don't have that kind of high level art. In Africa, for example, African people in general in Africa lack art. They don't have the concept of art, right? You go to a butcher, you ask for ribeye or filet mignon, and almost none of them, apart from specific high-end butcheries, actually even know separate cuts of meat. They'll just tell you, sorry, we don't do that. We'll have to give you meat with the bone or some nonsense like that. So, and this is someone doing a skilled job. They don't have the art of, okay, there's a difference between this soft part of the, I'm not going to go there, right? So in general, certain cultures haven't even evolved to have art in their, consumerism. For them, they consume food because they're hungry and it fills their stomach. So portion sizes is more important than the flavor for a profile, for example, in this sort of cultures. So there's no way you're going to get them start killing people just because they want to, they want to, have that Epicurean sort of, high of, hey, my hands ended someone's life in a particular way, and then I sniffed the panties afterwards, and then this made me feel like, they're not going to do that. If they kill someone, it'll be like because they want to eat them or something, That's the reasons why.
Afterwards. Anyways, let's go.
Now, I'm very, very interested in the extent to which this is a sort of a dogma in your mind. Suppose someone were apprehended in a kidnap case, and from extrinsic evidence, it became pretty clear that he was involved in the conspiracy to kidnap, and he simply refused to clam up, even to the point of answering questions having to do with the whereabouts of the missing person. Now, would you say that nevertheless the Fifth Amendment ought definitely to keep you from asking him, where is Jane Jones?
No, I'd be inclined to twist his arm until he told me, but you would be able to use the confession in court to convict him. So much of it is arose from duress.
Well, but it's illegal to twist somebody's arm, isn't it?
Yes, it may be, but it's also efficient when you're looking for a kidnap victim.
Well, but then the elimination of the Fifth Amendment is also efficient in securing a confession in a certain sense.
The Fifth Amendment doesn't prevent the police from taking confessions, duress, if they need the information badly.
Securing a conviction, I should have said.
Based on that confession, yes.
Yeah. Now, you have said that it is extremely important to permit the lawyer for a defendant access to the case that has been developed against him, the rights to pretrial discovery, right? Now, if that were done, and I tend to agree with you that it seems to me to make sense that the prosecution's case ought to be known to the defendant, oughtn't there perhaps be some complementary concession?
Yes, I agree.
Now, might a limitation in the use of the Fifth Amendment be a complementary?
what he just mentioned, for example, is where they sometimes would withhold information. Basically, they're saying that there is a right, okay, for the prosecution's case to be presented to the defense to say, like, what do you guys got against me? Basically, like, okay, so we have this, and this, right?
Actually, that's what I've asked. In one of the cases, it's like I don't even know what charges were brought up. So it's had to go to the court and ask for all the information. Yeah, so it's an interesting point, and also he's playing a lot of games over here. One thing I noted is he mentioned earlier, like, okay, we can't convict him over the the confession that he gave under duress, when you're twisting his arm or whatever.
Yeah, but
However,
you can find a kidnapper.
Exactly, you can find the body. Exactly, right.
That's all. I like this guy. Go ahead.
Right. Exactly. That's it. That's what I was gonna say. It's like, okay, it's interesting. I'm not sure if the firing guy got it, but yeah, it was just
No,
like,
I think he got it. I think the firing line guy got it too. I'm now obviously I don't know. I'm not mind reading, but I think I know this guy enough to know, like, okay, he would catch that, But what game is the firing line guy playing? Other than making a show, right? Because we get it, right? This is a show. He's asking questions. He's, what is he getting at here? Trying to find holes of this, let's make them talk, or you're free not to incriminate yourself.
He's trying to see if first of all, he's trying to see if the other guy believes in some kind of actually believes in the concept, or it's just beneficial to him, due to his work, basically, and kind of figure out, okay, is there some kind of consistent thing we can do about it, and following the law, and just he's trying to figure out the landscape of hey, is this a concept of virtue, or is there something else going on here?
To me, to make sense that the prosecution's case ought to be known to the defendant, oughtn't there perhaps be some complementary concession?
Yes, I agree.
Now, might a limitation in the use of the Fifth Amendment be a complementary concession?
No, I think that access to the defendant himself, compulsory statement, is not needed. Access to his evidence, yes, especially surprise evidence such as alibi. A defendant who walks in at the last minute says, I wasn't even there, and I've got 6 witnesses to prove it. But these problems are far more theoretical than they are practical.
Well, but it's awfully practical that fewer and fewer people are being convicted as a percentage of the crimes being committed, isn't it?
No, that's not true. I don't think the conviction rates are dropping significantly in any jurisdiction. I do think that police officers are becoming detectives once again because they have to.
Well, I think what is true is that that the convictions as a ratio of crimes committed is diminishing. And one of the reasons it's diminishing is, let's say, any reason you want, plus also one of the conceivable reasons is that the mechanism, the legal mechanism, is now so tilted in favor of
what?
Yes, actually, no. I think I get what the lawyer is saying. The lawyer is saying that police actually have to do their job again. And when you do your job, you're going to realize some cases just won't meet the requirements in the court of law based on truth and all the other stuff. So that's why a lot of cases don't end up in court, actually. So it's not that less cases are being convicted. It's just that less cases are even ending up in court to begin with, because police officers are actually doing their job. They're no longer just catching people, figuring out some fake, well, not fake, but they're just throwing things together and giving it to the court anymore, like they were in a certain time frame.
The defendant is to make conviction increasingly difficult. Is that possible?
If you really believe that it's tilted in favor of the defendant, I suggest as a research project you go out and get yourself indicted, and you'll find that it is not tilted in favor of the defendant.
Well, that's a very interesting project. Will you be my lawyer?
I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to.
In that case, I could do that with much security, I'm sure.
No, unfortunately, I have lost as many cases for innocent men as I have won for guilty ones.
You mean you are prepared to say that you have won cases for guilty people?
Yes.
I see. Now, but you do consider yourself an officer of the court, don't you?
Yes, indeed.
Well, do you feel any constraint in defending people that you know to be guilty?
There are limitations within which you operate, sure.
For instance, can you say to the jury, don't convict this innocent man?
Oh, no.
You can't do that?
No. I won't argue to a jury anything that seems like I'm saying I believe my client is innocent unless I do believe it.
So they're in interesting territory here, which is, somewhere where we started about the defending of guilty people, right?
Yeah, and one thing I know is he said he's won as many guilty cases as he's lost innocent one. I mean, that one is because it's interesting. I like the way this guy thinks, and I also like the way he answers questions. If you're speaking to an idiot, There would already been like, oh, you're contradicting yourself here, you're there, just an inner capability of actually having a conversation. I like that the firing guy is actually able to ask questions, get answers, follow through, as opposed to start going through some nonsense argument about, oh, I caught you there, and you've not caught anyone anywhere. He's just giving a very reasoned argument. Because if you notice, he's like, oh, you don't mind defending guilty people? It's like, well, that's the law, that's the job. They do have the right. However, I also have some morality. For example, I won't tell the jury, hey, my client is innocent unless he truly believes he's innocent. So there's a whole series of, this guy is obviously very, very well thought out, his own moral, and also practical disposition. I do like the way he thinks, actually.
No, unfortunately, I have lost as many cases for innocent men as I have won for guilty ones.
You mean you are prepared to say that you have won cases for guilty people?
Yes.
I see. Now, but you do consider yourself an officer of the court, don't you?
Yes, indeed.
Well, do you feel any constraint in defending people that you know to be guilty?
There are limitations within which you operate, sure.
For instance, can you say to the jury, don't convict this innocent man?
Oh, no.
You can't do that.
No. I won't argue to a jury anything that seems like I'm saying I believe my client is innocent unless I do believe it.
So therefore, a student of your rhetoric, who is also a juror, could probably find out whether you actually believe that the man was innocent or guilty.
No, because ethically you're bound not to express an opinion, whether you believe it or not. You can't say to the jury, I, as his lawyer, think that he's innocent. You'd be stopped immediately, any more than the prosecutor can say, I personally think he's guilty. Juries aren't impaneled to tell who's guilty or who's innocent. They're impaneled to determine whether or not the proof is sufficient. And the verdicts ought to be couched in terms of proven or not proven. That's all.
Well, I know that theory, but I also know that theory has evolved as a sort of a dogma that's wrested away from an idea in the law, which of course was that the reason these devices are built in is because that way the truth emerges most frequently. No, but if in point of fact one knows that the truth is that John Jones is guilty, and one uses the law in order to get him out scot-free, there is
He's going behind the law here. So our host here is more willing to tweak if he believes you're guilty. He's like, hey, I'm not going to use the law to get you out. But this other guy is more like a systems guy that says it's a system, What do you think? About any?
No, I agree with you. I think the other guy he would actually break the law if he really truly believed, and I believe, all the evidence and everything is right. It's towards it. I think the other guy is technically a little bit more moral, the systems guy, in a way, right? Because it's like it's a hard one, right? But the systems guy might be more moral because he's just like, look, this whole game is a game. First of all, we can never really know anything, but we have to operate within its bounds. And the other guy's like, yeah, but because he's never been in the system, right? He doesn't know the system. He's still all fresh-eyed, thinking, hey, bad people commit crimes and they should be away. But it's like, it's just, I guess it's naivety more than anything else. I don't know if he would change if he was let's say a prosecutor or defender.
At least poetically, a travesty being committed, isn't there?
Theoretically, except that again, society knows that the risks of imprecision in the trial process are so great that mistakes are supposed to be calculated in favor of the individual who doesn't get away scot-free just because he gets acquitted. He's known he's probably financially ruined, and if the police are satisfied he's guilty, he'll be watched. Furthermore, he has been subjected to the process of indictment and acquittal, which leaves at least half the citizens believing that he's guilty, and sometimes 90%.
Well, maybe your point is that it tends to be inconvenient to commit a crime.
No, it tends to be inconvenient to be charged with one. Whether you committed it or not becomes almost irrelevant in the process sometimes.
I mean that part reigns.
They also, they're nice and they're quick. They're being witty and insulting each other and arguing and
and
inconvenient. It's not inconvenient to commit a crime. It's inconvenient to get caught, or no, to be charged. He didn't even say get caught. It's inconvenient to be charged of a crime. Committing, not committing, caught, that's a different world out there.
It's a whole, and it's something that I've just learned. It's like it's irrelevant, completely irrelevant.
This is right up your This you would have thought this was a ridiculous, boring video a few months ago.
Right. But it's it rings so true.
In both cases, it would be true. even if you're a guilty man who is exonerated technically, you do carry some sort of a stigma. And it's also true that if, in fact, you were innocent, there is sometimes a residual stigma. But this is one of the laws of life, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's an unfortunate law of life, and it's a rule in our society because I suppose of bad PR. Nobody really understands what the criminal system is all about, but everybody thinks that they do. And I have had clients that I'm perfectly satisfied were as innocent as the driven snow, to use a cliche, who were always thought to be guilty, and the attorney is given the credit for getting a man off, even though the case against him was preposterous. Most shining example of that is Dr. Coppolino. I don't think an honest jury would convict a cur dog on the evidence against that man, and in fact, they found out that no murder had been committed, and yet there is a sinister thought afoot that through some rhetorical brilliance, he was snatched from the arms of the law despite his overwhelming guilt.
Well, I think it's very, very modest of you to say so about yourself. But I don't think, I don't think that it is exactly correct to assume dishonesty on the part of the people or the prosecution staff who believed that he was guilty and for that reason took him to trial. Do you?
No, it wasn't dishonesty on their part at all. As a matter of fact, the
You
prosecutor.
were talking about honest jurors a moment ago.
Oh, I said no honest juror would convict a cur dog on the evidence as it developed. The prosecutor was as much taken aback by it as were the witnesses who were caught, shall we say.
What do you think, for instance, at this moment, the prosecutor, having seen the evidence unfurl under your baton, would regret having brought him to trial in the first instance?
Oh, sure. The prosecutor never indicts a man unless he expects to convict him because...
But there's nothing wrong with the prosecutor, having heard your evidence, petitioning to the judge to dismiss the case, is there?
Do you like the jury system? Is there anything, and also is there anything you would change given your knowledge of, let's say, the American system with the jury, the other systems where the judges tend to decide?
Give me 5 minutes and I can answer that question.
Okay, but we shall continue here.
He's in a little deep then to turn around and dismiss the case. That creates all sorts of problems, including a great public suspicion that he's been bought off. Prosecutors don't do that, even though they may become persuaded halfway through the trial that their case is falling apart.
I mean, is it simply a matter of pride?
Gentlemen,
I
may
think-
we pursue these points further in just a moment after this brief interruption?
Brief interruption.
You say, Mr. Bailey, that you could, of course, take a case for the defendant or for the prosecution. When you were doing your legal work in the Army, did you in fact prosecute also or just defend?
I
Have you
started
ever-
out as a prosecutor in the
Yeah.
Marine Corps.
Right, in the Marine Corps, excuse me. And were you good at it?
Not particularly. I don't have enough righteousness in my blood to get up and demand a man's scalp.
Well, do you take the general position that those laws that prescribe punishment for wrongdoers are righteous laws in the contemptible sense?
No, I take the position that it's much more convenient if you're going to prosecute to have a righteous stripe somewhere. I tend to find something likable about most defendants, no matter how heinous their crimes.
Well, how many people it do?
Yes.
Well, now that's interesting. Now, I don't think I would be a prosecutor either. For the same exact reason that he just said, that the natural part of going out there and asking for somebody's head or asking for some, for again the righteous stripe, I don't believe I have. I wonder, would you be a prosecutor? Are you a crusader for justice? An advocate for the victim? For the innocent? If you will.
Oddly enough.
Yeah, it is odd, yeah. Well, is it possible under the circumstances that you have just described yourself as temperamentally on the side of the defendant? And that if so, you haven't perhaps weighed with the same kind of concern that other people have the difficulties that in fact we face in a society in which the crime rate, I keep insisting, is going up.
The crime rate may be going up. The conviction rate, I must quarrel with you, I think is not going down, and it will continue to go up as the process becomes more efficient. I'm not troubled at all that society isn't going to get its due. Society has almost everything running in its favor at the outset of a criminal proceeding, including a broad public prejudice that the fact that a man is indicted means he's guilty, and we're going to have a trial to see if some...
Yes, and that is true. That is true. The fact that you're indicted does weigh heavily against you. People come in with the presupposition that, well, why were you charged? Why are you being indicted here? If you're not guilty, right?
Right. Yeah, and to answer the other question, no, I wouldn't be a prosecutor. First of all, the whole victim thing, hey, look, you have victims on both sides, right? So I can't even utilize that word of victim. It's like you're going to go off for someone's head who potentially is innocent. So no, I wouldn't do it simply because, like I even mentioned earlier, I would rather go and defend a guilty person than prosecute an innocent person.
Indeed.
Some shyster can get him off.
Well, I don't really think that's altogether convincing.
Well, then you should try and
Consider-
panel a jury sometime. It's
Well,
been reading the newspapers.
Considering that all 12 members of the jury have to be agreed that there is no reasonable doubt as to a person's guilt before that person gets convicted,
Yes.
it seems to me that the individual is protected.
Most juries are made up of 3 members, sometimes 2. For instance, if you were injected into jury proceedings in the average community, I rather doubt that the jury would ever vote against your sentiments simply because you talked them all into the ground, and that's usually what happens. We are apt to find a 10-2 vote on the first ballot one way, but if you don't win the strong guy, you can forget about the rest. Sometimes they hang, not very often.
You mean that provided you get even if the two are the ones who are on your side?
Yes. And a jury imbalance is sort of a dangerous thing, but you can't avoid it. There is always a leader or 2 leaders on a jury, and the vote will never go against their sentiments.
Well, are you in favor of strong people on a jury? Are those the ones that you have these hypnotic vibrations with?
I haven't experienced any hypnotic vibrations, although I had a rather good rapport with one gentleman down in New Jersey who took a progressive view towards swinging. But I would rather see a mixed jury with more than one intelligent, educated, and articulate person on there, say about half, and the other half people from the mainstream of life with a little human sympathy and warm blood. And that, in my judgment, is a pretty ideal jury.
Well, is an ideal jury a jury that wants to find the truth?
Yes,
Yeah.
they do very much. And
But do you favor the notion that the jury ought sometimes feel that it has the right to transcend the truth, and therefore to weigh itself the question of whether imponderables are figured in such a way as to permit them to exonerate a man who's technically guilty?
yes, I think that's the final advantage in using juries instead of computers.
Well, computers would have a difficult time understanding it, wouldn't they?
Understanding me?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how well I could program them, I suppose.
Well, the matter of computerized justice, I read somewhere that you said that.
What do you think about the AI part now that we somehow started and somehow this must be the 80s or the 70s, but you're talking about computers, but now we're talking about AI deciding versus juries. Like, because what he just said, the host said something which is interesting, right? Like, look, sometimes the jury may just decide, like, take O.J. Simpson, for example, right? And the host, I don't think was actually, because again, we already know that the host, okay, is willing to go behind the game and tweak, right? So it's like sometimes they may just decide to free a guilty man, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's look, I guess this is one of those issues. You could look at it. It's like, okay, jury, okay, you'd have to look at it case by case or region by region, because obviously, if you're a black man in the South, the juries are not your peers, right? So you're going to be disadvantaged, etc. Versus, if you're a nice, cute white girl who's 18 with pigtails, looking innocent, hey, the jury's going to be in your favor. I'm sure we can even find stats right now. Cute pigtail white girls get off more crimes once it's already been to court than non-cute black, looking ass people in certain regions. So I would say it just depends on if you're more of a socially, if they can look at you and they can empathize. Right, exactly, right. So they're gonna look at some people and be like, whether they're guilty or not, they just don't like you, right? They can't resonate with you. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, jury can only really work if,
I've watched a lot of crime shows where, well, first of all, innocent people get convicted all the time and have been put to death, but also where before they finally found the killer, everybody just decided that it was this weirdo, whom was kind of a little maybe antisocial or a little off or strange,
exactly.
or collected birds or something like that, and like he must have killed her.
That's why I say, if you still have your life on right now, I would suggest getting those microchips, implanting them in yourself, because this thing can happen to anyone. Just to put a microchip in you, it has a GPS tracking of everything.
So point
and
being,
everywhere
recording,
record shit. Have CCTVs in your house, like just have it.
Reinforcement and backup. Yeah, get your interesting.
Yep, 100%. Get CC. If you have a house, just get a CCTV camera, get it backed up, pay an extra, $100 or whatever it is to get in, cloud space and also hard drive. don't be cheap, because you could never know these things. Just from experience, you could just be living life and some crazy shit happens, and somehow you find yourself in some crazy situation. Someone saying they saw you somewhere. It's like, no, but I wasn't there, right? So yeah, documentation. I would say that's really the advice I would give to anyone. Just document your experience in life. And you see, no one has to find this document. It's not like they can use it against you, because you are the one who has access to this documentation.
You really didn't like a jury trial, but there was no better device. Is that correct?
Well, somebody shifted a couple of words around. I said there are numerous disadvantages and shortcomings of the jury system, and indeed there are. But nobody has thought of a better one, and I wouldn't see it change for the world.
So no one includes you in this instance.
Well, exactly. I vastly prefer a jury trial to a judge or a panel of judges, even though they'd be excellent judges.
Why?
Well, first of all, judges don't come from the mainstream of life at all. They are almost jaded with criminal cases. They tend to look right through what the lawyers were doing and try and outguess them. And many of the protections built into the system evaporate, including a well-protected record for appeal. It's almost impossible to separate out a judge's findings of fact from his rulings of law. And when you go to the appellate court, you walk up empty-handed, no matter how atrocious the result.
So therefore, you say that judges are a disadvantage in the case of conviction, but not necessarily in the case of non-conviction, right?
Well, of course, if a man is acquitted, that's the end of the ballgame, and there's no way to test it any further.
Yes, but if somebody is concerned that too many innocent people are being convicted, then wouldn't a judge with his powers of penetration and his experience be more useful to you than a jury under the circumstances?
Yes, but judges, I'm afraid, sometimes don't tend to recognize a reasonable doubt. I've had 3 innocent men convicted by judges sitting without juries. I've had several convicted.
Do you think that the judges will be able to, if they, apples to apples, an impartial jury, okay, and an impartial judge, whom is more likely, given a number of cases, to figure out the innocence, to pick out innocent people? Or do you think it'll come out, or it doesn't matter? What do you think about that?
Yes, yeah, I don't think it matters, because see, the judge, he has a good point there about being jaded. You're looking at it more as a technical. This is a case. This is numbers. We're looking at evidence. So that what they might do in the end is just start weighing up the evidence together, as opposed to actually, let's say, using reasonable doubt, for example. Reasonable doubt would be more like, the evidence might be strong, but yeah, there's just something that doesn't sit quite right. It's not strong enough to convict. That's reasonable doubt. But then, in the judge who's been jaded, having so many cases, he's just going to see, no, the evidence is more likely to suggest X, Y, and Z. Therefore, he's guilty, as opposed to, considering reasonable doubt. So, and then obviously the jury, if the jury is, technically, let's say, incompetent or understanding how evidence works or logic, then now you're also going to have your issues there. What if you don't have that, intelligent leader type who can actually kind of lead the jury through the argumentation? Then you're also dealing with an issue there. So that's now the issue. It's just there is no perfect system there. I mean, okay, there's no preferred system in a very easy way.
They're all overturned on appeal.
On matters of law, not in fact.
That's correct.
Well, therefore, it wasn't the jurors themselves acted wrongly, but the judges, since you can only appeal against the law, can't you?
No, you can't say that, because the fact that a judge made a certain ruling which was technically wrong may well not have influenced the result. Nonetheless, you get a new trial. There is no appeal from a jury verdict as such. There is no super body of jurors, except in sometimes in capital cases. For instance, in Massachusetts, our Supreme Court is empowered to become a super jury before a man is executed if they wish to change the facts. Ordinarily, you can't appeal what a jury does, but if the judge has given you less than a neat trial, as we put it, you can flip him over.
Mm-hmm. You can flip him over.
Well,
if you won't endorse the figures I saw that the ratio of convictions is declining over against the crime rate, you at least don't challenge, so far as I know, the fact that the crime rate itself is going up. And even if that ratio went up with it, so long as it remained a constant, it would still show that more people get away with crime than ever before. The conviction rate, I thought, was 1 out of 5. Now, if that is the case, do you have any advice to offer on how to do something, short of the usual sociological?
Sure, improve the efficiency of the system.
How would you do that?
I would remove politics to the extent that it were possible from the prosecution. The British system is far superior to ours. Their lawyers are much better. They are professional advocates and not politicians.
Yep. Prosecutors being elected. The district attorney is an elected official. Right? That's
Yep.
What do you think about that? Like, just being someone not an American, let's say. What do you think about that? You think that's kind of crazy? That why you guys elected prosecutors?
Obviously, it's simple. I mean, it goes if they're elected, right? It goes through the way the
The
system
people.
works in
Okay,
elections. Yeah, the
makes sense.
people,
Makes
right?
sense. And
It
this is about
represents.
law and the people and the righteous. And that's why did I ask you if you would be a prosecutor? You said no, huh? Okay, yeah.
No, I
Uh,
wouldn't be a prosecutor. I mean, there's just something that doesn't sit right with it. It's a whole game of I don't know. There's just a whole game that I don't like. I'd rather defend people than prosecute them. Um,
all right.
They back both ways. That is to say,
to
a
be
man.
concrete, for instance, you would not allow the president to appoint the attorney generals or the district attorneys or what?
No, I would take the mechanics of the prosecution away from politicians. You may have to have a political force to do the indicting, but without giving that same force the power to carry forward a trial where it is politically expedient to get a conviction, and it usually is against anyone of importance, and put it in the hands of a professional advocate who may have defended a case last week and is prosecuting this week, just as Queen's Counsel do over in the British system, you would eliminate the security that the prosecutor had when he got the indictment, that he could phony it all the way through and just interrupt his power.
You mean that because he wouldn't be constantly in touch with the information, with the kind of information that he could then distort? Is that it?
Not only that,
Because
but
he wouldn't be an arm of government.
it's unlikely that those witnesses
Yeah, this is good information for when you're forming your kingdom and all that crap.
who were coached into giving certain stories before a grand jury.
You would want a fair kingdom, wouldn't you?
exactly right.
Now that's an interesting thing in terms of usurping power in a particular domain, but giving people enough freedoms in the relevant areas of their lives. Um, it doesn't last though. It's an unstable situation. That's the problem with that. You can't be like, oh, how can I be a dictator in a highly prosperous country where everybody thinks they're free? Okay.
The same kind of enthusiasm from the professional advocate whose only job it was to put the case in.
Well, how do you account then for the fact that the crime rate in England seems to be going up, at least according to Sir Hartley Shawcross, who seems to be the principal advocate of a very basic kind of reform in the whole view and in the whole idea of how to handle the criminal procedures? How do you account for the fact that even with this system, the felony rate is going up in England as much as it is here?
I don't think that the increase of the crime rate particularly reflects the system that's used to try defendants. I think it reflects other forces shifting and heaving in society, and maybe illusions held by that generation, which is becoming more criminal. But most of the people I defend did not, before they got into trouble, if they committed the crime in question, sit down and calculate their chances of apprehension. Only the professionals do this, and the professionals who are intelligent enough to consider the odds seldom get caught anyway. So they're not compiling your statistics. A good bank robber, by that I mean one who is successful and getting lots of money without getting caught, is apt to sit down and say, well, now I'm going to make sure I don't shoot a policeman because that carries the death sentence. This is the only kind of person I've ever heard of or talked with who was at all deterred by a death sentence, whether it existed or did not exist in a particular jurisdiction.
Well,
Yeah, so he knows what he's talking about. He knows the different people. He knows how they.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just the way the arguments he's giving, everything. This is a very high level guy. It's like, yeah, I like the way he moves.
I know the distinction between crimes of passion and organized crimes, but surely the figures show that organized crime is itself on the rise. For instance, there seem to be more highly organized car thieving rings than ever before, and they are less and less spontaneous. A car thief, I'm told that in New York City you can actually put in an order for the model stolen car that you want and guarantee delivery within 24 hours. The service is very good.
Yeah.
That kind of thing needs to be, something presumably needs to be done about it. What?
I can't agree that there is a rise in the professional crime situation. I think that statistically the increase has been more in the either sex or otherwise sickly motivated kind of crime. For instance, up in Boston, some 39 of my clients have shot each other, so that I'll have no cases from them. I would say that organization is pretty well wiped out. It was a strong group of hijackers at the start.
Practice birth control.
Yes. Well, it's called death control. It's a little different. But no, I don't view with alarm the professional criminal. As a matter of fact, it's getting tougher and tougher to rob a bank, I'm told on good authority. I view with alarm the stupidity and ignorance of society in throwing people in prison, doing absolutely no good, teaching them how to go from petty thieves to bank robbers or something better, throwing them in for rape or for other sex offenses. And I am particularly disturbed by testimony from 4 or 5 psychiatrists in the past week that 40% of the people in the Massachusetts State Prison are psychotic. This is asking for trouble.
Gentlemen, we will continue after this.
The people in the Massachusetts, I am particularly disturbed by testimony from 4 or 5 psychiatrists in the past week that 40% of the people in the Massachusetts State Prison are psychotic.
Did you hear that percentage? Did you hear that? In terms of,
I mean, yeah, is it really true though? 40% psychotic, meaning having issues with psychosis, not psychopaths, right? So, okay, look, I guess maybe they go hand in hand, and even if that's the case, so what, right? They committed the crime, they gotta do the time.
yeah, no, it's a question of especially in the American system, the prisons are and the police and also some hospitals are what are the place where the homeless problem and
right. I know what you mean.
Also, yeah, homelessness is also where this problem ends up. There is no mental health infrastructure here, right?
Yeah, I see your point.
That deals with that. So you're gonna end up with a disproportionate. Now, obviously, some people end up in jail too and just go psycho, yeah, and start seeing things too, right? Because they're there, right? So, but point being, yes, there's a high percentage of these guys going through that system in America. But anyways,
this is asking for trouble.
Gentlemen, we will continue after this very brief in a moment, and we have this discussion to follow.
Do I understand, Mr. Bailey, that you're taking now the view that we've heard so?
What do you think of those microphones, by the way, on the chair?
Yeah, I was wondering about them. I mean, yeah, interesting microphone. They look quite hench as well.
Okay.
So often that, in point of fact, to put somebody in prison may have the effect of ensuring that he graduates from prison a hardened criminal, whereas he went in a soft criminal, and that under the circumstances they shouldn't be put in jail but somewhere else.
They should be divided up into groups. They're very different kinds of people that are all shoved in together, and their evils overlap. They not only become hardened criminals, they become more clever, which makes it more difficult to catch them, and I suppose creates a better crime rate. But by maladjusting human beings, as is done when you throw them in prison, they come out first with a stigma, so that they probably don't have much of an even chance to succeed ethically. But they come out with a whole series of frustrations.
You're not against stigmas, are you?
Unnecessary stigmas, I suppose.
No, I thought we were talking about guilty people.
Yes, let's talk about guilty people. The innocent
ones. Somebody robbed a bank. I don't think there's a hell of a lot we can do about it to keep him from being known as an ex-bank robber, even if he becomes president of the New York Stock Exchange.
It's true, but you'll force him back into bank robbery. Some come out, believe it or not, with the intention of, what do they say, going straight. That's a rather difficult thing to do, frankly, go straight.
Do you have any figures on it?
The recidivism rate in every prison was enormously high. Most of the people who get convicted of bank robbery have other offenses in the background when they were in the process of education.
Well, then maybe that's an argument for keeping them in jail longer, right?
It might be.
If they rob a bank each time they go out and we lengthen the sentences, then that makes fewer bank robbers at the end, right?
I know some judges that sympathize with that view and hand out rather stiff sentences to those who appear to be too clever in their professions.
And then after a while you go in for keeps. Is that correct in Massachusetts anyway?
Yes, you're apt to draw life the second time around on a bank.
On a bank?
Yes.
Armed or unarmed?
There's no difference in penalty, armed or unarmed. The distinction is whether or not you're masked, oddly enough.
I see.
If you're masked, you must get 5 years.
And the second...
Wait. So if you do it, being intelligent, yeah, it's interesting. He's kind of noted earlier, like judges give
so armed or unarmed doesn't matter. You rob the bank, armed or unarmed. But if you put on a mask, then they punish you. But I guess it wasn't COVID. It wasn't COVID. Yeah. I mean, I guess now if you don't have a mask.
All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So during COVID, it's like, hey, I was trying to prevent. Oh, man, this is funny though. I guess it's like, yeah, it's like, hey, if you're good. But didn't you say earlier that they tend to hate smart criminals? They give them worse sentences. So maybe that's part of it.
Too clever, too good. It's like, hey, dude. And here's the obviously there's the
who's gonna rob a bank without a mask? though.
Here the idea of, okay, you're dangerous, so we're gonna hit you harder. But also, I
because
get the impulse of wanting to someone whom is very good at their crime. It's like, dude, you could be good at other things. Okay.
okay.
Why are
Right.
you messing up? Why are you showing up in my court? Right? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you could be like a fellow judge or some crap. Why am I talking to you here? You know, so you get why you would throw the book at that kind of person. It's like seeing if
Yeah.
you're like, you deserve freaking punishment. You're a freak. You're being a you're a bitch ass nigga or whatever. So
Armed with a bank.
On the back.
Yes.
Armed or unarmed.
There is no difference in penalty, armed or unarmed. The distinction is whether or not you're masked, oddly enough.
I see.
If you're masked, you must get 5 years.
And the second time life.
No, it carries life in every occasion. The judges ordinarily don't impose life for the first offense.
Well, now, as a practical matter, and I'm quite serious about this, how would one distinguish between, let's say, two young men aged 22, one of whom...
Now, isn't that the issue, though? Now that explains why there's a discrepancy between black, white, female, and male offenders. Is that they actually have ridiculous, penalties, and obviously now the judge chooses, how he's going to actually exercise that penalty.
oh yeah.
That explains it.
Yeah, and there's always a credibility issue as well. That explains differences between groups. Let's say, whom is more believed, men or women, in such and such type of a case, right? Then that, and even if people are trying to be objective, it's just going to turn out that if women are more believed in such and such a case in society writ large, it's going to be reflected in the courts as well. But anyways,
two young men aged 22, one of whom manifestly wouldn't benefit from special treatment, and one of whom would. Is this a psychiatric problem?
Yes, psychiatric, psychological, sociological. One would distinguish by pouring a little more money into experts who could study these people at the time of their commitment and prescribe some kind of corrective conduct to those who are incorrigible. Why perhaps should be incarcerated. But I think a better system of penology would not leave the sentencing up to the judges, because no judge can sit down and say, well, he should be out 20 years from today. He should be sentenced indefinitely, and he should get out when people whose professional ability enables them to project a little bit which way this fellow is going and what routes he has developed, feel that it's time for him to get out.
Yes, but surely you wouldn't say indefinitely, even if it was a trivial offense, would you?
No, there are some offenses on which you can quickly put a limitation. Perhaps it's a fine.
Yeah.
I say indefinitely as to anyone who may be a danger to society. These are the people that you're really complaining about.
Yeah, yeah. So that ideally then each person would be treated as an individual, and as an individual he would be assigned to the proper kind of reformatory. In effect, is what is involved, isn't it?
Yes, and the proper kind of syllabus. Just breaking up rocks for 10 years doesn't really do much for a person. It probably does a great deal of damage.
Breaks a lot of rocks.
Yeah, it breaks a lot of rocks, but you can get a lot more efficient service out of a human being if you're going to put him in chains and break rocks. This is what
what an asshole thing to say. Breaking a bunch of rocks doesn't do much. Breaks a lot of rocks.
Yeah, but I think he's trying to say we should use criminals, or for something, as opposed to just putting them in chains.
Yeah. So, what would you use? Okay. So, either way, obviously,
I would kind of agree if you give them a choice and then you allow them to earn some money in it that is heavily taxed. I think, and that would allow them to be able to reintegrate society, because then they'll be practicing skills. In general, I think that would work more if they're trying to actually reintegrate these people back to society. Not rocks, but if they want to break rocks, fine. They could be bricklaying. Think about it, right? They could be using all these people to be building cheap, affordable homes.
But you can get a lot more efficient service out of a human being if you're going to put him in chains and break rocks. And this is what most of them do. Something not much more productive.
Well, that I think is completely understandable. As far as I'm concerned, completely commendable. Even if the humanitarian dimension were involved, the utilitarian one is. Obviously,
Certainly.
You're much better off getting somebody who commits a crime at age 20 and at age 30 is reformed and will lead a useful life rather than using up your wardens. But there is danger, of course, of a sentimentality creeping in, which has the effect of always finding an excuse for every crime. And it seems to me that some professional defendants, I don't know you well enough to pass judgment on this, seem somehow always to be angling.
Well, let's just take a pause here. And what he's talking about now is this question of responsibility, blame, right? Okay, let's look at why he did it, and let's, in order to decide the level of punishment or treatment or whatever, or maybe let's say mitigate. Then you get on this endless loop of causality. Where this is,
Yeah,
go ahead.
that's true. That's actually how I probably end up because, hey, I mean, he did this because of this, and then his mother abused him when he was 5. That's why he started serial, killing people. So there's always going to be reasons, right? Because it's all causality. I guess what they're trying to do though is not what we're trying to find. They're not trying to find a cause. What they're trying to do is see, is this person dangerous? Can we just mitigate, these low level desires that they have by helping them overcome it, as opposed to someone who's just sort of doing it for high level reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it your position that there are people who are just plain evil in the sense that they do not desire to curb their instincts, and that under the circumstances, whatever it was that caused them to become that way, society does need to, in its own defense, to isolate them?
Well, putting aside for a moment the psychiatric problems, because that very murky science doesn't help us much as it goes around slapping labels such as sociopathic and schizophrenic and so forth, doesn't enable us to predict or cure bad conduct. Nonetheless, the usual reason for the commission of a non-compulsive, non-obsessive crime, and I put all the sex people over in that area, is because the individual thinks that this is the most successful way to get what he wants. And indeed, many bank robbers is because nonetheless, the usual reason for the commission of a non-compulsive, non-obsessive crime, and I put all the sex people over in that area, is because the individual thinks that this is the most successful way to get what he wants. And indeed, many bank robbers make a great deal of money and never get caught when they start businesses and become members of the PTA. There's got to be a way to teach them that you can wear a $150 suit without stealing it. And many
He's like, yeah, you can be like me.
of the clever criminals be enormously successful in business, where many of their brethren operate within the law and every bit as viciously. And if they couldn't do that, they could become politicians.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Because then theft is no problem at all.
Well, no, the
Oh, I guess, yeah, then,
I mean, hey, look, yeah. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's just taking jabs all over the place.
Yeah, the requirement for any real moral standard disappears. One sort of shifts it to suit what the public is fancying that week, or at least this is my conception.
Well, I think that may be a little bit cynical.
It is a little bit cynical, but
I think you like to be a little bit cynical.
No, I like to put the bite in every now and then, because occasionally fellows put the bite into me, and it's a good exchange.
The trouble is, as an old anarchist, I rather resent you using my rhetoric about the similarities between bank robbers and politicians. However, it is, I think, true that there has been a discernible movement in social thought on the basis of which one never blames the criminal for anything at all. One blames his mother or his father or the society or the...
It always starts with the mother. You did the same thing too, and everybody always goes down. It's always with the mother. She can't get a break.
Hey, she's the one that's is given caregiving responsibilities.
Or the books he did read, or not the books he didn't read, and so on. And whereas all of that may be, in a sense, true, if you assume as an ideological axiom that something causes everything, it's nevertheless true that as far as the society is concerned, the objective is to keep him from doing it again. And I think that there's been a disproportionate amount of time given to that, as distinguished from how shall we revise society so as to make it perfectly pleasing to Al Capone.
No, you can't revise society to make it perfectly pleasing to Al Capone, although it might have been possible at one stage to teach him another way to accumulate the same advantages that he took outside the law. It ought to occur to somebody, and talk of excuses and blame doesn't really get us anywhere, but a lot of rather interesting and proper feelings. I'm interested in reasons. If a man commits a crime, what's the reason? Because until you find out the reason and work on that, you haven't corrected.
One of the reasons is that he may be a wicked man.
Wicked people, as such, are rather rare in my experience, and I have opportunity to meet many, if indeed they exist. People who are unsuccessful, sometimes horribly so, when they commit murder, are much more common than wicked people. Wicked people are the witches that we used to burn in Massachusetts 300 years ago, when, with the revealed wisdom of some kind of Ouija board, it was determined that a witch should be stoned to death or hung.
How do you know they weren't witches?
Well, there's very little scientific evidence to suggest that they were, but it was fashionable at the time to attribute many of the maladies that were otherwise unexplainable to the work of witches.
Yeah, you're shifting the categories here now. I said that some people are wicked, and you've just given me a homily on the fact that the wicked people are a small percentage of the whole. I thank you for the homily. Let me repeat, there are some wicked people.
He's doing your quant qual, not all.
Right. What do you do about them, and how do you spot them?
There are wicked people in every phase of society, and probably a few more in my day-to-day encounters than in yours, perhaps. But the word wickedness doesn't really help me much. It's like the word evil. Every human being trots around with some purpose somewhere, and he thinks that what he is doing is going to make him happier than if he didn't do it. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it. Now, starting with that premise, which is my own philosophy.
Yes,
how do you isolate
make him
wickedness?
happy irrespective of what it does to other people?
Certainly, but people who
It makes,
don't
it
particularly-
makes a sadist happy to hit other people, right?
it gratifies him because
Yeah.
the sadist is sick.
Yeah, that's right.
It's twisted.
That's right, yeah.
All right. The only people that you might characterize as wicked are those that are simply doing what they're doing criminally because it's more convenient than to do it within the law. The people that I have no feeling for whatsoever are professional killers, for one. But I count that man as not much worse than a governor who won't commute a death sentence because it's unpolitical.
You have any special beefs for professional killers or anything?
Not really. It's like, okay, look.
Just only if they're cannibals. Only if they ate them. Then, no.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Do I have any issues with professional killers? You see, the kind. Okay, there's nothing I can do. Let's just say
Why
I
do you
like
think? Or
them.
let's ask. Why do you think he has beef with the whole professional killer? Because he's a practical guy. He looks like
Because he could be a
he
target.
seems like that's the first thing I thought of. Number one, and there's something about them that he doesn't like. They're messing up the game somehow. Like, you know. It's
yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah, they're outside the law.
Yeah.
They're very good
Yeah, out
at what
there
they
taking
do.
money and killing people.
He's like, you're making more money than me, and you know.
I
Yeah,
have
but also,
no
yeah.
feeling for whatsoever are professional killers, for one. But I count that man as not much worse than a governor who won't commute a death sentence because it's unpolitical, even though he has grave doubts about the guilt of the man that's about to be buried beyond all correction of the injustice.
Well, I think that's a little slightly unjust as a comparison, because there are governors who believe that the prerogative of commutation ought not likely to be exercised, that,
Certainly
that,
true.
that he is there to implement what the legislators.
Gentlemen, we have a number of other points on which we'd like to touch after this brief interruption. Gentlemen, we have a number of questions that we would like to direct to you. They have been compiled by the firing line staff.
This is how they open up the panel. I mean, come on, yeah, they set it up. I mean, come on, you got to give these guys their props. You know, you're out there with your dusty channel. These guys were out here opening up panels in the 70s.
Staff. Neither of Mr. Buckley nor Mr. Bailey has seen them prior to this time. I will direct specific questions to you, and if your opposite number has a comment or a rebuttal, please feel free to do so. We'll direct this first one to you, Mr. Bailey. What is your primary purpose in taking what are referred to as sensational cases? Is it the money?
I was about to say, I was about to be like, well, like, that's, it's like, it's well, because everybody wants to be here and somebody's going to be here taking this money.
Oh my God.
So what do you mean?
God.
Yeah, but let's see.
Money.
notoriety, adventure, or what category does it fall into?
There's no simple answer. Sometimes it's the challenge, sometimes it's the money, and sometimes it's just being obstinate.
I don't imagine that requires a rebuttal, does it, Mr. Buckley? Or does it?
No, I think he comes through.
We'll direct this question to you, sir. If a lawyer knew beyond question that his client was innocent, would he be acting properly, insofar as you're concerned, in falsifying evidence to prove that innocent? Now, we must assume that his client would otherwise be convicted.
Well, I think I better give you the legal answer since I see my attorney in the room. The answer is no. He would not be so justified. He would have to make his representation.
Interesting. So yeah, he is saying that he does believe in tweaking crap, but he's going to give the legal answer of like
Yes, right. But you see, he did give he said the legal answer. So we
that's
know
what
what
I'm
he
saying.
really thinks.
That's my point. He does believe in, but then he's going to give the legal answer. But the fact that the question got asked is interesting because we were already.
Yeah, because we talked about it. Yeah.
The answer is no. He would not be so justified. He would have to make his representations by other means.
Mr. Bailey, are there circumstances under which an attorney can justify this?
None.
None whatsoever.
None.
All right. Let's direct this question to you. And again, Mr. Bailey, how do you rationalize the fact that you have gotten acquittals for men that you knew to be legally guilty?
There's only one case where that really happened in just the terms that you put it. Sometimes they get a conviction different in degree than that which might have been warranted if the defendant had told his all. But in the one case where it happened, I tried desperately to put the man in prison, and the state's attorney held out for a capital conviction, and he shot for the moon and got nothing.
In effect, then, it was the state's attorney who was.
I think so. The judge encouraged him to take manslaughter. I tried to get him to do it. He wouldn't do it, so the fellow got convicted of simple assault, which is nothing.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Mr. Buckley?
No, I don't.
Mr. Buckley, is it, we will exclude Mr. Bailey from the answer to this, incidentally. Is it fair to judge lawyers by the clients they keep? For example, is it fair to speak disparagingly of what we refer to as gangland or underworld lawyers?
Well, let's start first with the question, is it reasonable? Sometimes certain things that are reasonable are not necessarily fair. I think that it is true that there are some people who specialize in defending people who are generally thought of as guilty. I don't think that the lawyers are entitled to rule as adamantly as they do, that only the jury has the right, finally, to establish whether a person is guilty or innocent in the eyes of the body public. I think the body public is entitled to make its own determinations concerning the guilt or the innocence of a particular defendant, provided it has conscientiously searched the record. So that I hope, just as free to say that I consider certain people guilty who, in fact, have been proven not guilty, as Mr. Bailey is, to say that he knows people to have been guilty whom he has sprung.
I would like, again, Mr. Bailey, to go back to our original point, and that is the reference to the attorney and the, quote, type of client.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to call it an evening. All right. Started out with the jeans, ended up in the courtroom. On your way out, click the like button. Thank you.